Okay, it is 6:06 p.m. on Tuesday, February 21st, 2023. We'd like to go ahead and start our City Council work session tonight. We'll go ahead, I believe, Andy, we're going to turn some time over to you to kind of go through what our work sessions begin.
Yes, so Council, you'll recall approximately a month ago, you approved the contract with WCG to prepare what we're terming our traffic calming and pedestrian safety toolbox. So just by way of a refresher of what that is, toolbox is just kind of our, coined phrase, but what we're really developing is a manual and a process, right? And in large part, it's independent, impartial process whereby we can evaluate requests for traffic calming, pedestrian safety. We've also, you'll recall, in the last year we debated about, we ended up putting one of the rapid flashing signs on the trail crossing over at 6000 West, south of Highland Elementary there. What this is all getting at is a process in the manual whereby we can receive a request from a citizen to evaluate either any of these things, speeding, pedestrian safety, signage, and and determine those areas that they should be implemented. If you look at any one given intersection, you'd say, oh well, what is signs at this intersection? But if you count the number of intersections across the entire city, and said, okay, we're going to put one of those fancy signs at each one of those intersections, that's a whole different cost, and that's a cost that we cannot afford as a city. But so this is geared at helping us use our dollars the best that we can to receive the highest return on our investment for where we put our investment into these elements. What's going to be the areas that need the attention worst, and that we get the highest return on our investment. And so this evening is kind of a introduction to the process, but also a chance for the consultant team to receive your feedback, to understand what your thoughts are on it. They've previously, and they'll talk, they previously met with the staff in some fact finding presentation, but also fact understand how you see this going, what your vision is for traffic calming and pedestrian safety in Highland. And then your feedback this evening will be taken and combined into the next step of the process. So with that, we've got Jeremy Searle and Sean Sagers with Sean Sager, sorry, I always said Sagers, I apologize, Sager, with WCG, and with your permission, Mayor, we'll turn the time over to Jeremy and Sean.
Okay, Jeremy and Sean.
Great, thank you, Andy. We're excited to be here with you. I know, it's Mardi Gras, so you guys probably had some big plans going for tonight. Right?
We got to get done fast.
Time to party. So hopefully this is almost as fun as Mardi Gras parties, but yeah, way funner.
I've been to Mardi Gras, it's not.
So as Andy mentioned, my name is Jeremy Searle with WCG. I'm the project manager on this, and we have Sean here. Sean is a regional planner. He was with MAG for many years. Was the regional planning director there, and so many of you may know him from that. But he has tons of experience doing planning in these types of projects in Utah County, and so really excited to have him here. He's going to lead through the discussion on some of the traffic calming efforts. So real quick, just wanted to kind of outline what we're going to talk about tonight. And you can see it up there on the screen. We want to talk the benefits of a traffic calming toolbox and some of the discussions that we've had with your staff and emergency services. Talk about what those traffic calming measures could be. Talk about pedestrian safety, funding and policy, example project that we're going to do on Canal Boulevard, and then just a little bit on access management. So first of all, and I hit on this a little bit last time that I was here, but this is a big topic right now. In fact, I was just down at the City Engineers Conference. Andy was there. But this was talked about a lot. This is one of the concerns that is brought up by cities to me all the time. And some of the biggest complaints that they get is people always want to calm traffic or slow traffic going around neighborhoods. And oftentimes it comes down to whichever group is the loudest gets the attention, right? And rather than doing one-off studies, which we've done dozens of for cities, or focusing on one group where there's a loud voice, this allows you to fairly treat the city and to look at what is the greatest need and address that, and make sure that your funding matches that. Okay, so that you're using your resources in the right way. And not only cities are struggling with this, but UDOT as well. In fact, we just helped them establish what they call their speed management studies, same thing as traffic calming, right? And so they're looking at how to address this on UDOT roads. And in fact, they're having us update their speed limit policy right now, how they even set speed limits on UDOT roads. So we've got a lot of experience in this. We're working with cities and the state to address this. The other thing that we just want to point out too is this is also really important from a liability standpoint. We want to make sure that your toolbox and your procedures are consistent with national standards, and that it's done correctly, so that we minimize the city's liability on these types of things in the future. So that's important. I've kind of already talked about the scope of work here, but so I'll be fast on this. We're going to look through different methods for doing this, make sure that we're identifying those that are beneficial for the city and that fit the city's needs, and that we don't use ones that aren't, that don't fit well in the city. We're going to identify a standard process for finding the right locations to do traffic calming, and then a way to prioritize and rank those traffic calming requests. And then do the Canal Boulevard study, and then finalize it for adoption. So I'm going to turn it over to Sean for a minute to talk about our efforts so far and about traffic calming measures in general. So.
Thanks, Andy. So we met with Chief Patton and Chief Gwilliam a couple of weeks ago, 3 or 4 weeks ago. Appreciate their time, and your street supervisor, Ty Christensen, and they were a great source of information for us to start to think about how emergency services are delivered in the city. What we're getting at is we don't want to build big traffic calming devices on routes that emergency services use to get to those locations, because it can slow down the trips. It can be dangerous. I think Chief Patton, you were describing some of your apparatus weighing close to 80, 90,000 pounds when they're filled with water, and we don't want one of those going off of a speed table that we put onto it. That's right. That's right. So we had a great discussion. We talked about how some of the bigger roads, those UDOT roads, that would not be appropriate for us to put active control devices on. I'm going to use that term, active and passive. Active, you can think about us building something in the roadway. That's either going to be a bump or a neck down or some type of constriction on the roadway itself. Whereas passive devices might be a signage or symbols or education programs or other devices that we'll talk about. So those two things, and we talked about this, hierarchy of roads and what roads do emergency services use. In that,
Can I just
yes,
ask, on
Mayor.
that map,
Yeah.
I haven't seen, so is that something that our staff put together, or is this something that you've taken and put together?
Andy provided this with us
Okay.
about a week ago, huh, Andy?
Yeah, that's just a basic layout. All the orange roads are the UDOT roads, all the yellow roads are the collector roads, and the reds are they aren't officially classified by the city, but they're kind of what we term neighborhood collectors, and those are the roads that funnel the neighborhoods, if you will, to the collector roads.
So in talking with the chiefs and Ty, we identified those roads that are very important for emergency services to try to basically keep clear of those active devices. We don't want to build those big devices on those primary roads. And this is just a discussion we had with staff, nothing written in stone here, but really good feedback for us to start to consider where we want to place passive versus active devices. And here's an example of some of those passive calming measures. You can put the radar speed signs. I think your city has a couple of those in operation. Ty said they're great, but sometimes they require a little bit of maintenance, and upkeep on those. Pavement speed limit markings, we could have the road painted 35 miles an hour or whatever it might be. Additional speed limit signs, striping. This one technique in the middle, we call that a optical speed bar. That one image in the middle. And what you can do is you can start to place those lines closer together in turns and such, and it starts to give you the optical perception that you're going faster, and so you actually start to slow down a little bit. Andy calls this the hairy lines or something like that is what stuck in my mind, so I remembered that. Enforcement, education, crosswalks, all kinds of things that you're doing that are not construction projects. These are just passive devices. And Jeremy or Chief William or Chief Patton, if I miss anything, feel free to jump in if that's all right.
That's the one in the middle, the striping,
Yeah.
has not been used in the Utah market, correct?
I think there's one example that we heard of, is that
So,
right?
so UDOT is, actually as part of our work with UDOT on their speed management studies, they're doing a test case out toward,
Is it
Fair?
5 Mile Path?
It's not Fairview, it's Fairfield.
Fairfield, yeah.
Sorry. As you approach and leave Fairfield. So they are doing a test case. So this has been used back east more, but UDOT's doing a test case. And as we mentioned before, we thought Canal Boulevard might also be a good test case for that.
So tell me how that works again.
Go ahead, Jeremy.
So
Do
the
you have
obstacles-
a sign and an optical thing? I mean, you have these lines, how does that slow people down?
Yeah, so they're spaced evenly down the road, and then as you approach turns or curves or hills, you can place those closer together. And so as you're going at standard speed, those lines are starting to go past faster, right, as you go around curves and stuff. And so you
Okay.
naturally feel like you're going faster, and it causes you to slow down, just as I guess, an unconscious reaction to that.
So that's tested, we know that works.
Yeah, it's been used back east quite a bit,
Uh-huh.
but like I said, in Utah,
Yeah, I've
It's-
never seen that before.
yeah, it's pretty new. So.
Very new. We were thinking, like Jeremy mentioned, maybe something on Canal Boulevard, maybe get a BYU student group to do a little before, during, and after study, to see how effective it is, to give us some more data, just like UDOT's doing on SR 73 out near Fairfield. Active. Let me give you a comparison to what would be active traffic calming measures. These are things that we would build in the roadway. Road diet. I don't know if you know what that term is or not, and we're giving you a lot of terms tonight, and Andy and Kelly, were you guys able to send out the packet? So we were like, we ought to give this to the council before the meeting in case you guys wanted to look at some of this stuff and see what a road diet is, but that's eliminating a lane of traffic that's unnecessary or unneeded on a road. The example would be eliminating a 5-lane road down to a 3-lane road, meaning you take off 1 lane each direction. Salt Lake City's done a couple of these where they have more road capacity than what they actually need in terms of volume on the road. Medians, I think you guys are familiar with those. Curb extensions or bulb outs, raised crosswalks, roundabouts. The design of the roadway, traffic circles, neck downs, on-street parking, raised intersections, and so on. And we can go through each one of these if you guys want to tonight. We have that set of slides as well and get into a discussion of that. In that discussion with the chiefs and with Ty, on those bigger roads that we identified as emergency response routes, we identified those measures that were acceptable and those measures that the chiefs did not think that would be acceptable, that diagonal diverter, rumble strips, speed humps or speed bumps, as we talked about, taking a big load of water up and over one of those humps in an emergency situation would not be good. So that was the feedback from our discussion with staff.
Sean, if I can interject something, and Dr. Smith would probably have something to weigh in on here, and this is something I hadn't thought of that Chief Patton had brought up. is that it's not only getting there. We often think about the response time on some of these routes, but once they have somebody in the ambulance and they are working on that person on the way to the hospital, and now I lose my expertise and I need to turn to both of you, but that the jarring and things of a person in the ambulance on the way to the hospital while they're being worked out on is also a consideration. And I had never thought of that, because I'm always thinking get them to the emergency and not really get from the emergency to the hospital. So I thought that was an interesting perspective that I hadn't thought of.
Because you look on the other side, though, sometimes that bump might reset their heart. So, I mean, it's hard to say. So I guess the question, I'm just being facetious, I'm sorry, but so on county, or not county, but Canal Boulevards that goes into Harvey Boulevard, which is in Cedar Hills, they have a couple big speed bumps in front of their school, Deerfield. And certainly, I drive that way because I go up to the Canyon Road to go over to Pleasant Grove. But at the same time, it would be interesting to know what the American Fork Fire Department and police think about those, because they have been very effective on that road. And that's the east end of Canal Boulevard. And I'm just curious, because our citizens are asking for that on the west end of Canal Boulevard.
Yeah, that's something we could look into.
I think it'd be interesting to know if they're having problems, because American Fork now provides all the fire and police services for Cedar Hills. And that's right before you come to Cedar Hills Park and that school. I think if you talk to people over there, they like those speed humps a lot.
Great point. We can reach out to,
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see what their opinion's been.
for sure, they've had those in there for a while, so we could talk to them
Yeah.
about how that's working. Good idea.
Can I just-
Yeah.
So on speed humps in general, speed bumps, they're often asked for. We hear that request a lot in different cities. But they're generally not very popular once they come in. And I can't speak to that one specifically, as I haven't talked to the city on those. But a few examples that we've worked on, we did a traffic calming study up in Park City, and they really wanted speed bumps. And we said, yeah, this isn't a great idea. You've got snowplows, people generally don't like them, they're hard on cars and stuff. And they said, no, we really want them. They put them in, and within 2 years, the city had taken them back out again because the residents were complaining about them so much. And that's a fairly common thing, is residents feel like they really want them, and then once they're in, they go, oh, this is beating up my car, I don't like having them here, and they complain about them. So,
Well, they've been there a long time, Cedar Hills. I'd just like to see what their opinion is.
Well, no, and
it's a good point.
yeah, I think we have to look at emergency response. I'll tell you my opinion of Cedar Hills. I damaged my car on them. I don't like, the one in Cedar Hills, now they're probably a little higher and a little wider than maybe some other speed bumps, but personally, I damaged the bottom of my car, and I'm going, probably if I was on the city council, I would have had a little nice couple of words to their, at the
Yeah,
time when it
I always
happened.
slow down when I
You know,
hear them.
well, no, and I slowed down, but just the way that came up and came back down. But the other concern now, as we look at Canal, because we mentioned we've had a lot of residents. What's interesting, you've had some residents come in asking for speed bumps. I've also had a resident that showed up and said, please don't put a speed bump here. They're worried about, everyone talks about the slowing down. He goes, I think as they slow down and speed back up, I might have exhaust by my house. I might have more sound. I mean, it was interesting because we have the others are saying they're worried about the sound on that road, or we want to slow them down for the thing. This resident was more worried about the environmental and the sound he's going to hear once they speed back up. And I thought that was an interesting, I hadn't thought of it that way.
It's a good point, Mayor, and one of the things we often hear about speed bumps too is you can't just put one out and have it be effective, right? Because people feel like they're slowed down, and so they immediately speed back up as quick as they can. But if you have them consecutively, then that's more effective. But you're right, we have those same issues with the exhaust and the speeding and slowing. So we'll definitely talk to the American Fork and Cedar Hills and get their
Yeah,
thoughts
I'd
on
like to
those.
know what their opinion is.
I think that's a great
Yeah.
suggestion. Thank you.
And we've got some of those slides or images that we sent to you earlier. These are the ones that the chiefs and Tide thought would not be acceptable on those primary routes. I'm going to go through diagonal diverter, rumble strips, and the speed hump or bump. Diagonal diverter, this is basically starts to eliminate connections between roadway systems. So you can see you can only do a right-hand turn on that road. You can't do a through movement into that next intersection. You see advantages on the left side, disadvantages on the right side. rumble strips. So these are pretty effective in rural areas. In fact, there's quite a good body of research and evidence in UDOT's rural areas that these are very effective in eliminating roadway departures, is what they call them. Cars going off the roadway. You get fatigued or tired. You hit one of those, it starts to wake you up. I'm sure you've all done that, whether on purpose or inadvertently, and felt that. Disadvantages in urban areas, it starts to create some noise, tire noise, and sometimes the road surface, it requires another coat of another treatment, shortens the vehicle tire, dangerous for motorcycles. Bicyclists hate them. Bicyclists do not like these because they're often trying to figure out how to avoid those, in the particular location. And oftentimes if bicyclists gets too far to the right, there's a lot of road debris and rock buildup and that type of thing. So, and that's the speed hump or speed bump that we've talked about. We touched on that real briefly. Do you guys have any questions on these? Just feel free to jump in. If you guys want, I think I can go through each one of those lists. It looks like we got enough time tonight that we can keep going for a little bit.
And just make a little comment. And I've had an experience I had on Canal Boulevard and also on the Alpine Highway recently, is I try pretty hard to drive the speed limit, mainly because I have a target on the back of my car by the police. But, because I've given them a rough time this year, right? Yes, that's true. But anyhow, I find where, like on Canal Boulevard, where it widens to 3 lanes, I've had people right behind me, I'm driving the speed limit, they hit the 3-lane thing in what we call the suicide lane, and they'll pass me on the left side. And I had that happen going down the Alpine Highway last week. I was driving, it's 35 there, I was driving 37 or so, and somebody gets in there and passes me on the left. So I kind of worry when we put that 3rd lane in. We obviously need it for turning, but I think it's an invitation for people to do stupid things and to speed. So I just kind of wanted to throw that out because I've had that experience twice in the last month. And I wasn't driving below the speed limit. I'm driving the speed limit 2 or 3 miles above it. So
that's why I think staff has directed us that Canal Boulevard may be a good road for us to look at in more depth and start to do some analysis of where we have speeding occurring and where some treatments might be. Jeremy, do you want to?
Yeah, just a quick thought on that. I agree with you. That's unfortunate that it's happened to you. That's obviously illegal. And Canal Boulevard has done the design of that, for the most part, has a pretty good what we call access management. There's not a lot of driveways and accesses on there. And so that 2-way left turn lane is primarily needed at the intersections, right, for those turn pockets.
Right.
And so one thing that we could consider there is putting in planted medians, right, with either some rocks or some trees or something in that center median so that people can't use it to pass, but it still opens up at intersections for turn pockets and things like that. And those medians not only help solve the issue that you mentioned, but having some trees or some decorative rock or something in there provides another kind of natural friction point, a visual cue, and helps to naturally slow
things
people
down
as well.
Yeah, and the other thing on Canal Boulevard, since we're on the east side, I was on the USDC board when we kind of approved that road. I mean,
Yes, that's right.
you all know me over there at MAG.
Famous.
Yeah, I am infamous, really. But one thing we wanted to maintain is a wide shoulder for bicycles. And people are coming down that to access the Murdoch Canal Trail. And I think we need to look at that pretty carefully if we put median strips or whatever we decide to do, because we're going to have, 1,500 or 2,000 people living up in that neighborhood, many of which will have bikes. So I think maybe in this, we need to talk about keeping bike lanes. I think those are critical.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Can I just ask, since you brought up about medians, we have, this is for the police and fire, maybe you guys can chime in. We have a couple of streets we've put medians in. One is Alpine Highway. We have some medians with some trees, so that would, Scott, that should have helped, but hopefully people weren't doing it. And we have our Highland Boulevard. What has been our experience? Do we have more accidents there because of their less? What's kind of, has there been any difference by having medians in the middle?
Well, let me just, and I mentioned this in our meeting when we met with these gentlemen. I remember when Mayor Franson put those medians in, and I, as a young patrolman back then, didn't like them because it restricted a lot of movement for law enforcement to be able to move around and catch speeders or people who might be violating the law, if we needed to get turned around quickly to get to an emergency call. To answer so I didn't like them in the beginning. I've grown to appreciate them, but I don't know that it has affected, we haven't done any studies. And it's been such a long time ago that they've been put in to be able to compare what's happened back then to what we have now. Obviously, the population, they've been in there for 15, 20 years maybe.
They've been in 20 years.
Yeah, 20 years that they've been
What's
in
left
there.
of them?
What's that?
I say what's left of them. They've taken out 3 of them already.
They do take a beating every once in a
Yeah.
while. There are occasions when we find vehicles that are upside down or have gone through those medians and taken out trees and a lot of landscaping, but it would be hard to say the difference between the traffic calming, if it has an effect or not, between what we had then and what we have now, because we certainly have an increase in population than we had 20 years ago. The road is traveled much more heavily than it was 20 years ago. So I'm not sure how I can answer that question to give you the right answer.
The reason why I'm asking is, as a council, at some time it's going to come up that on the Highland Boulevard up where D.R. Horton's going to be developing, which is in Lehigh, but there's an agreement that they're to participate in that road design. And so we have medians right now on Highland Boulevard. The question will come to the council, do we keep extending those up to the Sky Estates area, or do we not? That's a little bit what I'm going to, it is a setup that's going to be a decision. Maybe it'll be this council, it could be in the future, but it will be a future decision to be made.
I can tell you that when you narrow a roadway, and I'm sure these gentlemen can say the same thing, when you narrow a roadway, whether with any type of measure, whether it be medians or even striping, it has a tendency to slow traffic down. As people don't feel like the road is open to be able to travel at higher speeds.
And I thought we'd clock someone going 100 miles an hour up on that northern.
Well, there have been a few times when they come down that pretty quick.
Thank you, Chief Gwilliam. That's, I think, good insight. I can't speak to those medians specifically, but studies have shown that in general, raised medians do reduce crashes, particularly where there's a lot of accesses, and it eliminates that left turn across traffic and reduces those angle crashes, and the right turns are a lot safer to make on those types of roadways. So generally speaking, they do tend to reduce crashes, but they're always unpopular because you're taking away the left turn movement, which is difficult for residences and businesses. So.
Are you going to look specifically at Canal Boulevard with some suggestions, or?
Yes,
I
so
don't know
Canal
if you-
Boulevard is our case study
Okay.
To go through our process with. So yes, we will be making specific recommendations for Canal Boulevard.
Good.
So as we go into the rest of these, we're just going to click through these, see if you guys have questions about how they're effective or not effective, or if you want to see where these are placed or how they would work in your community. Hopefully you got a chance to review some of that material. This is just a review of those slides that we had. This would be considered a passive element. It's a sign on the side of the road. LED flashing, stop and pedestrian signs. These are increase awareness of the crossing or the traffic control. This is something I don't think we had in the packet.
You don't.
It was sent out the other day, and this is something Andy brought up, this RRFB, Rectangular Rapid Flashing Beacon. These are activated by the pedestrian.
We had those on 6000 West by Highland Elementary.
Is that right? That's, how do you guys like those so far?
Oddly enough, the observed behavior is people don't push the button. We see a lot of people just still crossing without pushing the button.
Got it.
But when they do push them, they are nice and they do draw attention there. But that was a surprising result for us when we were watching it when they first went in.
Again, speed limit markings on the road. This is a passive
Like that.
measure, pretty low cost. Optical speed bars, we talked about that briefly earlier.
And that would be used more if you have a road that has some curvature in it. That's why I think we've talked about maybe Canal, because that's one that's not a straight, it does have some curvature in it, but.
That's right.
To the council.
You could do them in Lone Peak colors.
Chevrons,
Why are they
Start-
called chevrons? Is it just the logo?
Yeah, I think so.
yeah. Fed Highways has a rotating scallion, is what they call their logo, with a rotating device, and I've always wondered where chevron and these terms come from.
How does that calm traffic?
Yeah.
It raises awareness.
Emergency.
Yeah, you often put these approaching different features like pedestrian crossings or different things, so
So it's kind of a warning.
it's like a warning.
Awareness, yeah. Oftentimes.
It'd almost be nice to have those arrows up at 4,800 and when you come up to SR 92, have some that almost show how you curve and one that goes straight. I
No,
mean,
that's a good idea.
so,
Yeah.
I've got some of these up around my house where the fire station is. And so they warn you that, hey, a fire truck could be pulling out
Oh.
of this driveway into traffic. And it wears off, but then they repaint it. It looks like it's been used pretty good. Of course, additional speed limit signs. You know, Ty is going to complain that there's more maintenance and, you know, that type of work on this stuff, a little bit bigger budget to take care of those.
Do they usually cluster them like that?
Striping narrower lanes, you know, just as the chief mentioned, anytime we can start to narrow the lane, we get the effect that we are constricting travel and you're paying more attention. It's called friction. And the driver starts to pay attention to that in much more greater detail.
so Andy, we had the state legislators, we fought about trying to keep the roads wide. Now we're trying to say get them narrow. It's just a facetious.
That's right. And Jeremy, if you see anything here you want to point out, feel free. Landscaping, again, that starts to create friction. You know, what's behind that tree? Better slow down a little bit. I can't quite see. There's shadows, there's contrast. I can't tell what's happening. So he starts to give you the effect that, hey, I better slow down and pay attention to what's going on here. Crosswalks. Oh, a pedestrian. This must be a very highly used pedestrian zone. I had to pay attention. Is this a school crossing? Kind of gives you an indicator that I should pay some special attention to this location. You see these guys use flags as well, those crossing flags in this application.
We had crossing flags in 6800 West at one time. Do you remember that?
We did.
Have those disappeared? It sounds like you're not familiar. Okay. Just down 6800 West, where the home that kind of burned down, right there, that cross, they used to have flags.
Old
showing back and
crosswalk
forth.
where the push-button pedestrian crossing went in, there was flags for a while there. I don't know what happened to them.
Ended up in someone's boat.
Yeah, ended up in someone's water ski boat, Jeremy
That's why she
says.
said she could look at this.
Enforcement, additional enforcement, of course. Sometimes that leaves a little bit of a negative, driver morale, if you get targeted like Councilmember Smith, if that's what you're,
Yeah, target on the right.
or it costs more money, to do that, additional patrols and that type of thing, and so trade-offs there as well. Additional education, sometimes that's difficult to implement, after we get our driver's license, who wants to go back through that manual and start to learn some more things, so that can be a little bit difficult, but you could do it in terms of city newsletters or that type of thing. This is that road diet scenario that I mentioned earlier, where before we had 2 lanes each direction, and on the right-hand side, you can see we've eliminated one of those through lanes, put in a 2-way turn lane in the middle, and then also built some bike lanes or something to that effect.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in on this. One of my favorite examples of this is used to be called Bulldog Boulevard, now it's Cougar Boulevard in Provo. You've probably driven that. So they took out a lane and made it a protected bike lane. That just works really well and is a good example of this.
Yeah, we've seen some of the material that your consultant's working on right now, the active transportation consultant, your trails and bikeway consultant, Horrocks, and they're going to bring you some really neat stuff. Next week, is that?
We have a meeting tomorrow, don't we?
Got it. Got it. So they're going to show you some of those protected bikeways that Jeremy just mentioned that are becoming really popular in Salt Lake. Landscape medians, again, this breaks up that visual termini so you can't see what's around it. Maybe I got to slow down. I got to move my vehicle around a little bit. It starts to create a little bit more friction. Curb extensions at intersections. So extending that basically eliminating some parking and providing additional areas for a shorter crossing, if you will, for the pedestrians across that street. Pedestrian comes out and they can get across that street with a shorter distance. Raised intersections. Do we have one of these?
So there's not very many examples of these, but if you've ever shopped at the mall in Orem,
By that sports bar.
by the sports bar there, so it's on the northeast side of University Place. There's those shops there. I think there's a Deseret Book or something, a sports bar. They have a raised intersection there. And it's because there's a lot of pedestrians that use that intersection to go between the mall and those shops there, the movie theaters back there. And so you can kind of see from this picture, actually this isn't that intersection, that's somewhere else, but same idea. It brings them up to the level of the curb, which is the pedestrian level. So the pedestrians have the right of way there, and then it drops the car back down to the roadway after you get through the intersection.
Like a large speed table,
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the size of the whole intersection.
Raised crosswalk does a lot of that same type of thing, where you bring that elevation of the roadway up to the crosswalk elevation.
Is that what Cedar Hills has? Are those speed bumps or are they raised crosswalks?
Well, they use them as crosswalks, but they're kind of a hybrid.
Hills has mostly as a speed table, where a speed bump or a speed bump would just be one that, takes you right up over the bump and right back down, where a speed table generally has a flat portion on the top. Whether or not the pedestrians cross on it or whether it's just, a flat tabletop, generally that's the way we would refer to those and distinguish them between the speed bumps or the raised crosswalks would be just a speed table used generically in any location.
Yeah, thank you, Andy. That's a perfect description of them. One thing I would say is, I know I was a little negative on the speed bump earlier, but I am a big fan of a raised crosswalk. It accomplishes the same thing, but it really improves safety for the pedestrian. And we're going to talk about pedestrian safety in a couple minutes, but it's really critical that those pedestrians are protected. And this is a really good way to do that, especially at high usage crossings, right? I know Highland has numerous trail crossings that get pretty heavily used, sometimes near schools and stuff. They're good. So I am a big fan of those.
Roundabouts provide a great way to slow traffic through intersections. They're a little bit safer than a traditional lighted intersection, more expensive than a traditional lighted intersection.
I know you have done 1.1 million to 3 million. I think a lighted intersection, I guess it's just the lights at the intersection are what, about 300,000 or 350?
Yeah, you're right on. So roundabouts are more expensive to install, but what we found is that over time, they are more cost effective because you have fewer crashes, you have fewer maintenance with the signal equipment and things like that. And in most locations, they're actually more efficient. Stoplights, you have to stop at the red light and wait, whereas roundabouts are continual flow. At some point, the flow gets so big that a stoplight is more efficient, right? Like SR 92, right? SR 92, you're not going to put a roundabout on. But in most city streets, roundabouts work amazing. They're very efficient, they're very good flow, and they reduce fatal and serious crashes
So Councilmember Smith brought up, this is something we've looked up in the Highland Boulevard, up at that DR Horton, where it comes up there 118th North. There has been discussion about maybe doing a roundabout in
Instead
that
of
area.
a light.
Yeah, it's just something, there's some discussions going to have to happen.
Yeah, and I think those discussions are worth having.
We see a lot of cities. Spanish Fork is really going big in roundabouts right now. Provo City has done a lot of them. Orem City's doing a bunch of them. They're a great way to keep that intersection flow moving.
But does it take quite a bit more property to be able to do that?
Yeah.
They do. It's hard to fit them in existing areas, but if you're building new roadways and intersections, then they work great, right? Retrofitting's a little bit harder, but it still can be done.
Traffic circles. Again, this is just kind of providing a visual terminus for the driver, makes them slow, go around something. They have to be very deliberate in that movement. They're paying attention to what the other traffic is doing.
And to your question, Mayor, traffic circles are a way to kind of get the roundabout idea without having to buy the property on the corners. We don't usually recommend traffic circles for busy roadways, but for local
ones.
neighborhood roads, it can work without having to buy a house, right, on the corner or something. So,
Neck downs, I think this is a photograph of one that we have here. Is that
that's
right,
Canal
Jeremy?
Boulevard, yeah.
Yeah, that's Canal Boulevard, yeah. So the idea is to create a piece there where you're shortening that pedestrian crossing, eliminating some of the distance that pedestrian is unprotected in that roadway cross-section. On-street parking, you see that in Provo, very effective on Center Street. Man, I go slow when I'm coming down Provo Center Street because I don't know what's going to happen. Someone's going to back out, going to pull in, narrows the perceived width of the roadway. Chicanes, or Jeremy, you want to talk about this a little bit? This is one up in my neighborhood.
Yeah, so again, all of these active measures are a way for people to slow down. Either they go over something or they go around something, right? Chicanes are kind of that way. They create a way to make people turn and have to slow down as they do that or narrow up. You can see these here. It kind of directs them inside toward the lane, then back out, and then back in and back out through this area. And this is, like Sean said, by his house, it's coming down a hill.
Brighton High School.
And the kids would drive super fast down this hill, right? And so this is a way for them to kind of snake their way through, and it forces them to slow down.
Yeah, this is where you would go to jump your car off that elevation because there's a big elevation change, So now they've made it so you cannot jump your car through that intersection because you have to slow down to go through this device. Yeah. And mid-block speed table. So in the middle of the block, sometimes you can do a speed table, and Andy mentioned that.
This would be like the ones in Highland.
Yeah.
Or
Cedar Hills.
in Cedar Hills,
Yeah.
sorry.
And then we're going to go in and talk a little bit about pedestrian safety, really related to speed. And Jeremy, do you want to describe how this works?
Yeah, we mentioned this earlier, but pedestrians are so important to protect, right? And this chart, I think, really illustrates why. At 20 miles an hour, 95% of the time the pedestrian survives that crash. But just a small increase up 10 miles an hour, 45% of those hit at 30 miles an hour don't survive that. That 30 miles an hour is not very fast, right? I mean, just your local road's posted at 25. Right. A lot of people drive 30. And so that, to me, is scary. Same if you look at 40 miles per hour, 85% of those pedestrian crashes are fatal. And so that's why when I mentioned those raised crosswalks, just anything we can do to protect pedestrians near the roadway, I think is really critical. We do a lot of, like I said, safety work in the state, and there's been a lot of pedestrian crashes the last few years. Those have gone up, and unfortunately those often are severe injuries or fatal. And so that's one of the things that this toolbox will focus on is not only slowing traffic, but providing safe measures to help pedestrians through there. Sean already mentioned this, but we are coordinating with Horrocks on the active transportation plan. You can see they've got a draft map already put together, and I know it's a little hard to read there on the screen, but they're working hard on that, and we are coordinating with them, and we're trying to set up a meeting with them to start looking at where some of these traffic calming measures for trail crossings and pedestrian safety improvements could occur. So. Okay, before I move on, are there any questions or any thoughts so far?
Very first, you asked this question: how do you set a speed limit? Is there something that you're going to give us? I appreciate you going through, hey, 20 miles. Is there going to be a suggestion on different classifications of roads, what speed limit things should be, or anything that way?
It's a good question, and that's a big topic and a hot one right now. You've probably heard about Salt Lake City, who changed all their local roads to 20 miles an hour instead of 25.
All right.
Park City is right behind them. They're doing the same thing. They're going to start posting signs in April-ish. West Jordan is starting to study the same thing. They haven't made the decision whether or not they'll do it, but they're starting to study that. So this is this, like I said, is a hot topic. As far as setting speed limits, right now, the national guidance, the Manual for Uniform Traffic Control Devices, MUTCD, says that they should be set on the 85th percentile speed. Okay? But they are updating that manual right now, and they are making that a little bit more context-based, which is good, and that's why UDOT is looking to update their speed limit policy.
You want to explain 85th percentile?
Yeah.
Is that,
So 85th percentile is the speed at which 85% of the people on the road are either going that speed or less, okay? And historically, that speed has been seen as the natural speed limit that, how do I say, sane people,
majority.
the majority is driving at a safe speed. We assume that 15% of the people are driving way too fast. They're crazy, right? We don't want to go that fast. But 85% and below, they're going that. And so that's generally what the guidance has been from the national standard. But like I said, that's changing to more of a context-based. When I say context, it means taking into account more of the situational characteristics of the area, right? If we have a lot of pedestrians, if it's on a road with a school or two, right? If there's bike lanes and narrower streets and stuff, maybe that deserves this lower speed limit. So it's taking into more of that context rather than, oh, people are driving fast, let's set the speed limit fast, right? And what UDOT has found is when you just go off the 85th percentile speed, you design your road. Usually they'll design it for 5 miles an hour faster than what they want to post it, right? So they've already designed their road to feel comfortable at a little bit higher speed, so people will drive at a little higher speed. Then they'll do a speed study, say, oh, people are driving faster, let's raise the speed limit.
Right.
And then people feel comfortable going a little bit faster. And so a few years later, they'll do another speed study, and they'll raise it again, right? So it's this cycle of increasing those speed limits, and that's not effective, right? It's not a good thing. So that's why we're looking to change that. And so that's something that we'll touch on a little bit in the toolbox, but I think we'll have to have more discussions on that. As far as local roads, I think generally speaking 25, 20, if the city wants to go that way, is pretty natural, but it's the collectors that need to be thought about, right? And so that's something that we'll be talking about as we do this study. So good question. Okay, any other questions? All right, so one of the things that we'll be doing is putting together an implementation process. We haven't got into the details on this yet, but as kind of a rough outline, we put this together and wanted to show this to you. And again, this is all very much subject to change. This is just a rough outline. But generally speaking, a resident would submit a request for traffic calming. There would be a formal application, a small fee, and as part of that, they would need to demonstrate a certain amount of neighborhood support for that. Those submittals would be reviewed and discussed by the city and ranked, and those that are ranked high enough, they would start with some passive measures, maybe some striping or signage or things like that, to see if that makes a difference. We would do a trial implementation of those to see how effective those are. If there's still additional needs, then we would start to evaluate active measures, some of those more in the roadway type things that Sean talked about, and follow that same pattern. We could do a trial installation of those and then finally install those permanently. So that's kind of a rough outline of where we're headed. We'll flesh out the details and the application process and all that.
So
kind of
is there
stuff.
any cities, I mean, because you have down here formal application, and then you're saying, hey, there's a fee maybe for it to kind of be processed. What cities are doing this currently?
Yeah, great question. So American Fork is doing that, although they've had a lot of staff turnover there, so I don't know how that's being implemented right now. But they have that in place. We have helped Salem and West Point with doing some traffic calming toolbox stuff as well.
Are they using them where they do the application and the fee?
Yeah,
Is the biggest question the fee or just the application process, or?
I think it could be, I just was wondering how it's working out for everyone. Okay, if you do a fee, people are going to think a little bit more, and then when you say, hey, neighborhood support, you're going, okay, we sometimes have one person that's saying, hey, I'm having this issue, where, you know, hey, do you get neighborhood support? Are you willing to put a little bit of money for their little bit more studying? I don't know, I'm just wondering if that's worked for other cities.
That's a good question. The Salem and West Point ones are fairly new, and so I don't think they've fully got their application fee and stuff set up yet. So American Fork's probably our best one, and like I said, I haven't talked to them about that in a while, but I will do so.
Summit
So-
County has a process.
Oh, that's
too.
right. Yeah, Summit County does as well.
So what's a reasonable fee?
It's a good
Staff
question.
or-
We haven't talked about that, but in my opinion, it should be small, right?
Like $25 or something?
Yeah, something like that.
Have you ever had cities where they've allowed residents to, like, submit their own proposal? Like, we've had several neighborhoods where residents have come and said, if we pay for this, can we have it?
Yeah, as you start to look a little bit more nationally, I think it's Tucson has a program very similar to that, where the neighborhood actually pays for all their traffic calming, and that's adopted by the city. They have to meet certain criteria. It has to be approved by the city, but the neighborhood is actually the one that pays for it.
What do you think about that?
I think it helps the neighborhood be really sure that that's what they want, if it's their money on the line. So I think it's been effective for them.
'Cause it seems like then that can free up other money, right, if you have,
Yeah, like I said, it's not as common, certainly. Most cities see that as a city function, but it's certainly been done, and I think has been effective.
It might be a little bit like discriminatory though, because, you know, the better off neighborhoods can pay for it, whereas those that can't afford it can't.
Exactly.
I think you
And-
could
and I
put a
think that's been the
criteria that if it's a residential non-collect, I mean, you know, like you said, there's certain areas where the city probably should be looking to do it, where if it's a request that's maybe in a very specific neighborhood that, you know, not everyone in the city's traveling, you're going, okay, because we've had some inquiries saying, hey, they'd like to have some of these, you know, flashing signs, kids and things that way. Well, it costs $7,500, and it's, you know, if we did that, every neighborhood would have to be requesting that. So we said, hey, is there some support? And I can't remember, there was a dollar amount we suggested that if they could get it, and very rarely, have we had anyone, Andy, come up and pay for any of that ever?
Not yet, not during the recent months. We've had a number of neighborhoods say that they wanted to, but to my knowledge, we haven't had any of them pay for it. But I think there was a couple, a few years back that did.
That's why I thought there was a couple that did pay.
Yeah.
But I've had some that have inquired and says, hey, if you could maybe, and sometimes it's because they're responding to one incident that happened at that time, and then it's not as, you know, as they take a look back, it's not ongoing. But if they see a concern, they always can bring it to the council, they have maybe an option. It's something the council can look at.
Sean, just let me know, I am running short on time,
We're
so
almost 7.
I will be really fast here. And maybe that's the end, because it's not. There we go. I already mentioned we're going to do a case study on Canal Boulevard. And the last thing I just want to mention is we're also going to be looking at the access management standards for the city. So driveway spacing, intersection spacing, that type of thing. This is an example of one we did in Salem, but we'll be customizing this to Highland.
The reason why the access management's in there is having your accesses in the right locations versus intersections versus pedestrians. That's really key to the pedestrian safety elements as well, in that making sure that your conflict points are separated.
I mean, we have an issue over on Canal where we're coming out of the Costa Via and Arby's roundabout area, and you have another road that's already coming in and going, uh-oh, we've got a little issue here. You know, in how they're turning and that movement there, so.
Yep, you want good spacing for those types of things. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay.
Appreciate
Right
your
now,
time.
it's 7 o'clock. Do we need to take about a 5-minute break? We will take a 5-minute break before we begin the council meeting. Thank you for coming, both Sean and Jeremy. I appreciate it.
Thank you, council. Mayor.
7:11, we'll start in 1 minute. Okay, it is 7:12 p.m. on Tuesday, February 21st, 2023. We'd like to welcome everyone out to the Highland City Council meeting. We'll begin our city council meeting. I've invited one of our residents, Linda Walton, to give our invocation. Following the invocation, we'll have a pledge of allegiance by Councilmember Scott Smith. Linda.
Let's pray together. Our dear Father, we are so grateful to have the opportunity to even be here. We have a safe, warm place. We have a government that's working. We have freedom of everything. And it's just amazing, Father, that we have all of these opportunities to say what we believe, to have different beliefs, and yet to all be good neighbors. Father, we pray that you will forgive us for our sins and for the things that we do that make it more difficult in this life. And Father, we pray that you will give the Spirit to everyone here that is working on projects, to the council making decisions, to the staff that keeps everything together, and to all of the members of our community. We especially, Father, would like to ask for a blessing on the police and fire departments and for the paramedics, the others that are working on disasters. Father, we pray that you will go with us throughout this meeting, that your Spirit will be here, and that as we go home tonight, that we'll do so in safety. Father, thank you so much. Amen.
Please arise.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
At this time, we have a time set apart for unscheduled public appearances. We'd like to invite anyone here that'd like to come up and address the council. We do have a couple items that are public hearings. Item number 4, which is a public hearing on the mid-year budget adjustments. So there will be time allotted for those who want to come up and discuss on that. All other items are not public hearing items, so I'd recommend you come up at this time if you need to address anything on the agenda. But you're also welcome to come and address to the council any other items that you see would be pertinent to bring to the city council. So at this time, we open up the unscheduled public appearances for 3 minutes. Please come up and state your name.
My name's Grant Johnson. I'm a Highland City resident. I know I got a shot clock going on here, so I'm going to have to read this so I can talk really fast, okay? And I've got some special effects too. I'm here to speak in opposition to the recent licensing of Alpine Food Storage. Why is this crazy guy writing some of you 5,000-word emails, and what drives me to do that? And I just want you to know a little about me and why. I'm not an overgrown middle child or somebody with an overdeveloped sense of rules and fairness. I'm not the auto guy in that nice but hokey Tom Hanks movie. I'm here because over 10 years ago, my wife and I spent 2.5 months sleeping on a couch at Primary Children's Hospital, where we'd been staying there with a desperately injured child. I don't think this is anything a kid should ever, or parents should ever go through. My son broke both of his arms, both of his legs, his L2 vertebrae, had a collapsed lung, broken ribs, and they had to saw the side of his skull off to let his brain swelling go down. That's what's driving me here, but some through miracle, by the way, he made it through. And I just want you to know what I am seeing, and that's why I'm here. And the best way for me to illustrate that is to go with me on a hypothetical real quick. Let's say that all of us live in a cul-de-sac together, and I'm your neighbor right there at the opening cul-de-sac. I just get together with you in a neighborhood meeting and say, hey, I'm going to put a 2,000 square foot industrial warehouse in my backyard. I'm going to pour my whole yard down with concrete, and I'm including a loading dock. I'm going to erect a giant circus tent in my driveway for my retail customers because I'm going to open my own private Burger King. I'm gonna need some equipment as well to permanently store in my yard, irrespective of city ordinances. I got two 12-foot flatbed trailers, 3 or 4 box trailers, 3 large 4-ton box trucks, 3 skid steer Bobcats, one of them to be used as a forklift, 2 mini Tracos. By the way, instead of the sidewalk that you guys put in the neighborhood, I'm going to plow the front of my house in and compact it with gravel so that people can park parallel Scawampus right in front of my house in our street. And oh, by the way, there's going to be regular big trucks that are going to be coursing through our neighborhood now and where your kids play, so just be a little bit careful. What would your response to me be? If you bothered to stop laughing and realized that I was actually serious, you might have a 2-word response, real small words. What would you then do if I did it anyway? What actions would that say about me, about my regard for my neighbors and my community? This absurd hypothetical is not a hypothetical for those of us who live in Beacon Hill, Dry Creek, and Timber Ridge. We're used to this. This is just something we've endured for about 6 years, at least 6 years, that have been sitting there. But let me add to that hypothetical really fast. I'm going to go over just about 2 minutes, if I may.
You may.
Thank you. I'm going to add to my hypothetical right there. I'm going to put up about a half dozen floodlights so that I can fully illuminate my yard so that I can run my forklifts after dark. Sorry that if any of you work night shifts or that you may finally have gotten your kids or maybe to sleep. This is any old weekend in our neighborhood. And how many times have you sat in your backyard to see floodlights and the operating of a forklift in the evening? Beep, beep, beep. Welcome to our neighborhood. This person's not doing taxes out of their living room. This is not a person with a hair salon in their basement, which I'm fine with, all those kind of things. This is a business that should never be sanctioned by the city to operate in the middle of a residential neighborhood. If nothing's done, they're going to continue to do whatever they see fit, even after they have moved to whatever location in American Fork, because according to them, they are not doing anything wrong. I know I sent some of you this picture, or all of you this picture, of just a stack of pallets. I'm guessing it's at least 12 foot tall, and it's leaning. Well, I took that last Saturday before last, actually, because the Friday night, they flipped their floodlights on and their forklifts out there running, stacking those up. And the reason those are stacked up there is a great big giant truck's going to come pick those up at some time, and I think it did Wednesday that week. And it's just nothing new for us because it happens over and over. They're going to come pick up pallets, and they're going to drop up more materials because they're running an industrial business in our neighborhood. I'm almost done. I'm not here because of the noise. I'm not here because of the horrible eyesore, the weeds, or even because of the neighborhood parking traffic or anything like that. I'm not even here because the city, in my view, is assuming a catastrophic civil liability in the event someone like this were to be hurt or killed. I'm here to make sure that no one ever has to go through what my wife and I ever had to go through with an injured child. And I confess that I was pretty angry when I heard the audio of the council meeting last week. I just seemed to hear members of this body granting allowances to the law, to safety code, irrespective of what's been going on. But I don't believe you really fully realized what we've been putting up with for years and years. And all because the Wadsworth and want them to make a few bucks. But you don't live where we live and see what we see. To those of you who just voted to Alpine Food Store, I just want to say peace. I love you. I'm not here to beat you up. I believe if you tell me that you didn't really understand that all of this was going on. But trust nothing what I say. Look on Google Earth. Pictures and facts are stubborn things. Now that you do, I just ask you to please correct the course here. I don't want somebody's child to be crushed under a stack of pallets, or hit by a tricycle, by one of their huge trucks, run over by a damn forklift. I don't want to drive by yet another memorial bench, heartbreakingly placed on a spot where some poor kid, has been run over by a truck that should never have been there in the first place. I am asking you, based on the more complete view of the situation, to revoke their business license immediately, to order them to cease and desist current future commercial business operations with their residents, because they won't stop, and order them to bring their residents in line with city codes, just like you and I do. That's all I got. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I don't want to leave you hanging, too. My son grew up into a happy, healthy adult, and he works at Momentum Climbing Gym down there in Lehigh. You can't miss him. He's got big muscles, and unlike his dad, he's really nice. He's got fiery red hair. Go introduce yourself. He'll let you climb for free. So,
That's awesome. Thank you for giving us that update. Council, I did forward an email. What Mr. Johnson's talking about is there was an action the city council did pertaining to a business that was operating in Highland, Alpine Food Storage. Council, in the motion, it was, we were supposed to get a bi-weekly report. I have emailed all of you, I received a report today. I've emailed that report update from Alpine Food Storage to you this afternoon. So just, next council meeting, there will be a public report on where they're at and their status and things of that nature. So, anyone else would like to come up and address the council at this time? Seeing none, we'll close the unscheduled public appearances.
Can I just ask, Mayor?
Yeah.
I haven't seen that email because I'm pretty busy before I come to council, but is the gist of it, they're still in plan to move by the first part of April?
They provided pictures of some of the improvements they're actually doing at their new location. One of the questions I asked was if they were accepting new deliveries or deliveries at the Highland location. They mentioned they are stepping back away from not having so many deliveries come. They're starting to anticipate the hoping to be opening up. They're moving to a new location in the American Fork area. And they are, once again, they have pictures of some of the improvements they've done at that space. And they're just giving updates of how they see the process. They have got some things done, but they still are in the middle of some health inspections and some of the other things. They're pending a fire department inspection, just trying to get the timing to get their inspections done through the city and state.
Hey, Mayor, I have a question. As somebody on council who voted to revoke their license and not renew it, is there anything that can be done about these public safety violations right now?
And when you're saying if they are you talking like the...
I mean, the stacked pallets, I mean, the unsafe environment that's continuing to happen, that we've let happen.
Rob, can you help us a little bit here? I mean, I brought this up as an earlier thing. There's been comments about if it's an OSHA requirement, an OSHA, federal government requirements or things that way. I'd talked, Rob Patterson's our city attorney. Since that question, what would be your counsel to back?
Well, we don't enforce OSHA or UOSHA, Utah Occupational Safety and Health. We can enforce obstructions of public ways. There's part of the enforcement mechanism for a lot of these things relates purely to the home occupation process, which restricts a lot of the use of yard and all of that. And the council has voted to kind of allow that for the time being in its current form. So it would be there's no other restriction regarding use of the home other than the home occupation type process. So.
Councilmember Riddell, did that answer your question on that?
But I have a kind of a segue, which would be if I leave my trash cans out on the street for more than a day, then people are anonymously, which I really don't like, people anonymously complain about my trash cans in the street. Why can't you complain about a stack of pallets in the street? It seems like it's the same thing.
Well, yes, I said we can remove obstructions in the public rights of way, and so we could go in and do that, and we do get complaints, I think, about Alpine Food Storage. That's what led to this.
They did, Tim, but you guys voted to let them continue
And the pallets are not in...
Keep saying you guys.
No, does that stick to your heart there?
The pallets are on private property, my understanding. They're not in the city right away or anything. If they're in the city right away, what you're mentioning is we could go and do something.
We can remove
but this is on private
cars,
property.
if stuff gets left in the right of way, we can go remove that. But other than that, it's kind of as it is.
I think we need to be aggressive citing them on things if they're doing things that are obstructing. But at the same time, my understanding is they're moving their business, and we're encouraging them or forcing them to move their business. So we gave them an extension not to put them out of business while they're trying to move their business. And that's kind of where I came from. I mean, it's nice. We could revoke their license and say you're out of business, but I don't know how they'd afford to move their business then. And so I'm just the goal is to get them to move, which is what they're doing. And then I think we need to be sure that they don't continue to conduct business at their home after that move's done. That's kind of where I'm from. So, I mean, you can just put them out of business right now, but will that help them move? I don't know.
Okay. Any other questions on that one topic? It's not on our agenda really to be, it's just, we appreciate the input from residents on concerns they see. As we go forward, we now have a presentation. We have our 2022 audit. We'll have Steve Rowley please come up. He's with Kensington and Christensen.
which the city has hired to do our audit.
Yes, thank you. Good evening, council. Yes, we have finished the audit for the financial statements for June 30th, 2022. And so I am here coming back to report to you. As members of the council, you are what is considered governance over the city, and therefore we work for you. We don't work for management, we don't work for the city staff, we work for the council. And so we're returning to report to you how the audit went and the results of our audit procedures. So we can kind of go through this. Page number 1 of the report that you have in front of you is our opinion. And it starts out with that right on up front, and it states, in our opinion, the financial statements referred to above present fairly in all material respects the respective financial position of the governmental activities, the business type activities, each major fund, and the aggregate remaining fund information of the city as of June 30th, 2022, and the respective changes in financial position and or applicable cash flows thereof for the year then ended in accordance with accounting principles generally accepted in the United States of America. That's a long run-on sentence that says the financial statements can be relied upon. They are materially correct. It's what is called an unqualified opinion. So that is the highest opinion you can receive on your financial statements. So that was our opinion. How did we come to that conclusion? Well, we don't just come in and wave a magic wand and be able to determine what's there. So our basis of opinions, this report kind of goes through what's required there. So as auditors, we're required to plan and perform the audit in accordance with generally accepted auditing standards and government auditing standards. Government auditing standards is a step above generally accepted auditing standards, wherein we also look at the internal controls of the city, which includes things like how is the cash received and accounted for, how is the cash paid out and accounted for, how is payroll processed, how are the financial close and reporting processes of the city handled. We look at those controls to determine how much testing is necessary in order for us to give our opinion. Even though we look at those controls, we do not test them to the point where we can give an opinion on those controls specifically. And there's a separate report that we'll talk about, that we'll look at momentarily, that discusses that in a little more detail. Obviously, as an auditor, we come in and do the audit. That doesn't relieve you as governance of your responsibility or management of their responsibilities. Part of management's responsibilities is to make sure that the information that they provide to the auditors is complete and correct and in a timely manner. And as governance, your responsibility is to oversee everything that happens there. So you've hired a great group of people. There's a lot of wonderful people here that work hard to do their jobs and to perform appropriately. Our job is to come in and test what they're doing, to do sufficient testing to give an opinion on that. Now that testing includes sending out confirmations, doing subsequent testing. We do analytical testing, sampling, all kinds of different tests in order to be able to give an opinion on these. So our responsibilities also, they start listed there at the bottom of the page. We have to adhere to our professional standards. We have to be independent of the city. We have to understand the internal controls. We have to evaluate the policies that are used and determine whether they're appropriate. So a lot of that is what encompasses our approach to the audit. Later on in this report, it talks about what is called required supplementary information. So this information is not necessarily part of the financial statements, but the Government Accounting Standards Board felt that it was important enough information that it needs to be included. That's why they call it required supplementary information. What is included in that is the management's discussion and analysis. That's the first thing you see in the report after our opinion. And that's kind of a high-level summary of what happened in the city and compares that to the prior year and gives some context to what happened in the city. So it's a very good resource for members of the public if they have questions about what's the city doing with my money, or as council members, I just want to see high level what's going on. You can look through the management's discussion and analysis to understand what's going on there a little better. Additionally, there are the pension schedules required by the Utah retirement systems, which shows the city's proportionate share of the net pension asset or net pension liability of the unfunded Utah retirement systems pension plan, in essence. So those schedules are also in the back, and that is considered required supplementary information. Now, all of that information is part of the audit. We don't audit those specifically. We don't give an opinion specifically on each of those, but the procedures we're required to perform ensure that they do reconcile back to the underlying accounting information, as well as we do other testing so that as a whole we can give an opinion that that information is can be relied upon. Then the last part of this report talks about the other reporting required by government auditing standards. And so that's what talks about the internal controls. And so we're going to jump to that report right now. And that is on page 53, clear in the back. So as I mentioned, in the state of Utah, all governmental entities have over $1 million of revenues or expenditures are required to undergo an audit. And that audit is required to be done under government auditing standards. And so as I mentioned earlier, we look at the internal controls. And so in looking over the controls of the city, we did identify that there was a material weakness in the internal control over the city regarding the financial close and reporting, and we'll look at that shortly. That was the only material weakness. We did not identify any other significant deficiencies or material weaknesses in the controls of the city. Even though there was a finding, this is a similar finding to what was there the year before. As we came in, we noticed marked improvement from the year before. So we like to see that as auditors. We understand that the city staff have made changes to processes and procedures to help eliminate some of the errors that were identified in the prior year. So we appreciate their efforts to improve. There were still some items that we identified that needed to be reported on, so we'll look at that shortly. But just to kind of give some context, there was a lot of improvement this last year. Then additionally, as part of this report, we look at compliance with laws and rules and regulations, that if there was non-compliance, it could have a material effect on the financials. So our report in relation to that is that the results of our test disclosed no instances of non-compliance or other matters that are required to be reported under government auditing standards. So we do feel like the city does a great job of complying with laws and rules and regulations that could impact the financials. So that's a very good thing. So let's look at that finding real quick since we're on that topic, and that's found on page 57. So as part of our audit, we're looking over the information to be able to give an opinion and whether the financial statements are in accordance with GAAP, generally accepted accounting principles. So as part of our test work, there were several material audit adjustments that were required, and the areas that those impact are there indented halfway down the page. Several of those most of those are similar to last year, although the adjustments were smaller than they were the year before. So we're getting closer and closer to the target. However, there were still material adjustments needed to get those financials up to snuff, basically. So that's there for your, as our report back to you. Now, management's response is there. You can read through that. I know we've had a lot of discussions as well with Tyler and the rest of the staff about what can be done to further improve and make this better going forward. So I know they've got a plan in place to help make this better, but that's what we've identified there. But ultimately, all those adjustments were made, and so these financial statements are materially correct. So does that make sense? Is there any questions on that finding at this point? I'm happy to answer any of those before we move on, if you want.
So on the finding, what you're saying is they didn't get the numbers closed fast enough? I mean, help me just in layman's terms. The finding is what?
So you can think of an audit as like a vehicle inspection. You take your car to get an emissions test. It either passes or fails. So if it fails, what happens? Well, you got to go back, fix it, bring it back. If it fails again, you got to go back, get it fixed until it passes, right? So in essence, as we come into the audit, we say, okay, this number says it should be this. We do our test work and realize, no, it should be something different. And that difference is big enough that we then say, okay, you need to adjust this to make it so it's materially correct, so it follows accounting standards. So some of the issues relate to, in our discussions with the staff of the city, it seems like there is either not enough staffing to ensure that there's plenty of time to do these reconciliations in a timely manner, or in some cases, like the new leasing standard, that's a complicated area. It's brand new this year that had to be implemented. So we don't necessarily expect everybody to have that button down where it needs to be. It is a complex standard, and it's a new one. So they took a stab at it, got super close. We still had to make some adjustments to it to get it where it needed to be.
Can you explain what that is?
Yes, so it's called GASB Statement, so Government Accounting Standards Board Statement number 87, leases. So in essence, what this standard does is it makes any leasing or potential leasing transactions that a city or a government undergoes, it makes it a little more transparent on the face of the financial statements. So in the past, you may have heard of things like an operating lease versus a capital lease. So a capital lease would show up on your financials as a liability, like you leased a vehicle, for example. Well, an operating lease, if it didn't meet the technical definition of a capital lease, it was what people would consider an off-balance sheet financing. Because it doesn't qualify as a lease, it just shows up as an operating expense each year instead of showing up as a lease liability. Well, GASB 87 said, we're tired of these games being played. We want to make sure that if it looks like a duck, quacks like a duck, and walks like a duck, we're going to call it a duck, and so we're going to call it a lease and put it on the financials. So they changed how those were calculated and determined, and so that changes what now gets put on the financials. Now, as we looked over the city's financials and as Tyler looked over what was going on in the city, there wasn't anything that showed up as a lease liability. There were several potential transactions, but they did not meet the lease liability requirements under GASB 87. There were, though, now lease receivables that needed to be placed on the books. So if you had, and I believe in this case there was just the one lease that qualified, and it was a cell tower lease. So the city is receiving money by letting somebody put a cell tower on the property, and so now to make it more transparent of what's going on, we now show a lease receivable on the financials, and that's offset by a deferred inflow. So now if anybody's or has a concern about what's the money source of the city, they can look on the financials and say, oh, well, they're expected to receive X amount of money over 5, 10, 20, 30 years in this amount. So that makes it a little more transparent. So it's called a deferred inflow, which is, so a deferred inflow is something that is similar to a liability but does not meet the technical definition of a liability. And so when GASB came out, I think 3 or 4, well, maybe even 6 years ago, they came out and redefined what an asset and liability was. There were some things that didn't meet the technical definition of that. Yeah, well, so the reason why it's showing up as a deferred inflow is because we now have this big asset on the balance sheet, a big receivable. Normally, the offset to that would be revenue. You know, you sell a bill of goods, or, you know, provide a service, you have a receivable and you recognize revenue. Well, this receivable that we're putting on the books is the future minimum payments of this lease over 30, 40, 50 years. So they don't want to throw 40 years of revenue on the books in the first year you have a lease. So what they're saying is, well, you have this lease, but you're not going to earn it all right away in essence. And so over time, those are going to basically work themselves down to zero at the point the lease is paid off.
Amortization of a future, okay.
Yeah, exactly. It's a little complicated and
Actually really interesting.
yeah, so that's government accounting for you.
All right, thank you.
Yep, you're welcome. Does that help clarify your question, or is there more?
It does. I've got some other questions on other parts of the report when you're ready.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
Any other questions on the finding before we move on? Okay. And you can always ask more later, don't worry. I'm happy to answer any questions you have. So if we turn over the page to page 55, there's another report. So again, all entities in the state of Utah are required to undergo some testing required by the state auditor's office as their efforts to oversee the financial accounting of the governments in their purview. So this report is similar to the last report in that we're looking at controls of the city and compliance of the city, but this is in relation to state requirements specifically. So the areas that were required to be tested this year are those indented about a third of the way down the page: budgetary compliance, fund balance, justice courts, etc.
Oh, wait, what page are you on again? Sorry.
55, I'm sorry. So each of those areas, we're required to look at what are the controls the city has in place to comply with those requirements, and then we have testing and sampling procedures to determine whether they're in compliance with those requirements. So a lot of these are things you've probably seen over the years: Open and Public Meetings Act, and more recently, like the fraud risk assessment. So that's something that is now required that needs to be done. So we look at at each of those areas and we look at those controls to determine the extent of our testing of these compliance requirements, but similar to the last one, but not to give an opinion on the controls over those compliance requirements. And as we went through our testing, we did not find any weaknesses or deficiencies in the city's controls over compliance with those areas above. However, we did identify a few instances of non-compliance that we're reporting as well. And as a result, so we did identify material non-compliance with the budgetary compliance requirements. So this is similar to last year. We had a similar finding related to this. And we can look at that now since we're talking about it. So that's going to be back on page 58. So part of our testing is we need to look to see whether the city complied with the budget in terms of was there sufficient appropriations budgeted for, and how did the city fare in terms of those appropriations. Well, in 3 instances noted there on page 58, those areas or funds were over budget by those dollar amounts listed there. This is a fairly common finding that cities receive, and especially with cities that have a lot of road work to do, because prime time for doing road work is June, July, and August, and a lot of times if the city isn't aware of an invoice coming in, or if it's kind of a quick decision, you have a typical road repair provider, they come back and say, hey, we've got guys free for the next 2 weeks, let's go ahead and get the work done. It doesn't matter when the payment was made, we look at when the expense was incurred, when the service was provided, and that's what triggers the expenditure. And so in a lot of cases, those invoices, we need to pull them back into the fiscal year to say this was an expenditure, we owed them money as of June 30th, even though we may not have paid them until August or September even. And a lot of times, those specific types of things get missed in the budgeting process when you're doing budget amendments. So that's why these types of things are fairly common. We see these all the time in governmental entities. Even though it's fairly common, it still is non-compliance, and so we're required to report that. Is there any questions on this finding?
You mentioned it's where, you bring up an example, hey, we just got a call from a contractor, hey, we're free for two weeks. To me, that scares me, going, well, was that appropriately bid? Was there, things that so the question I guess I've always understood is, hey, we might have a project that started in June but not complete till July, but they can't bill because they haven't really finished, but they might be in the middle of the project. Would that be a case where that could happen, that through June, they've done, half the sill coating, but they have still other sill coating still to finish, and so we pay up for the work they've done at the end of June, but they're still underneath the contract that we approved maybe in March to do in July. Am I thinking that right, or is that differently?
Yeah, so basically, technically the liability and the expenditure would be whatever work was received by the city up through June 30th. So technically you can look at it and say, even though they didn't bill you until July or August, if they did work back in April, May, or June, technically that could be pulled back. A lot of the times that might be insignificant or immaterial, and so that's not a huge sticking point. And so these would be things that were, maybe the larger items that showed up. And that may not be the case for each of these areas that it's over budget, but certainly it's not surprising that it happens in the roads capital projects and the road fee fund where the road projects are being expended out of. And then the other area, the IT internal service fund, that just seems to be maybe some invoices came in that were unexpected or just missed being included in the amended budget. Does that kind of help clarify what that's talking about? Okay. So again, we talked with Tyler about this, what are some processes, what are some ways that this can be avoided in the future? So I know he's got a solid plan. In my mind, it feels pretty solid because it's what I would do. And it is what I do in the cities that I help consult with. I do prepare budgets for some entities and go through this same type of situation. So I feel like he's got a good process to make sure that this will be hopefully eliminated, if not very highly reduced, and it would really be just those things that come in right out of the blue, kind of last minute type things. Any further questions on that? Is that okay?
Not on that item. I had
okay.
Scott, you asked questions, right? I had one question on page number 3.
Yes.
It's about the 4th paragraph down. It's This deals with, at June 30th, 2022, the unrestricted fund balance in the general fund was $3,487,158, or 40.3% of the general fund expenditure. I thought that by state code, we had to be at 35%. Is this stating that we're over 35% at the end of the year?
No, you are correct with the 35%, but that calculation is 35% of revenues for the year. And so the state doesn't seem to care what percentage of expenditures it is. Now, that is a helpful metric that a lot of entities use to help say, okay, your fund balance is X amount. How long could you survive in a year of expenditures with that? So if you're at, 50%, well, so you could maybe go 6 months without any further funding. If you want to look on page 9, we actually do reference that requirement about the fund balance limitation. So page 9, if you go down about a third of the way, right above the underlined section that says proprietary funds, states that the unrestricted fund balance represents, again, 40.3% of the general fund expenditures, and then unrestricted fund balance also represented 29% of the general fund revenues, which is within the unrestricted fund balance limitation of 35%. So we decided to call that out this year, or Tyler wanted that called out. This is his management's discussion analysis, because want to make sure that, yes, we're compliant with that. And that is a requirement that we do test, and if it was over 35%, that would have resulted in a finding.
We actually voted to bring it down below 29%. I think we decided at 27 or something to fund some projects which haven't been funded. Okay. I've got a question, if I could, on page 10.
Definitely.
So on our outstanding debt, the revenue bonds there at the end of 2022, I understand that figure, 5.4 million. But as you go in there, it says compensated absences. I assume that's paid sick leave that hasn't
Yes.
been paid or has been accrued. So I understand that. I have no clue what the $1.7 million are in notes payable. I somehow missed that all these years.
Okay. Let me make
So
sure.
our debt really is at 7.4. This page 10, about 2/3 down. So I'm just curious what notes payable are. What are they? Do other people on the council know what they are?
So those notes payables are two things. There's a note payable to the Provo River Water Users Association, as well as a portion that's to the Highland Conservation District. So those are both in the pressurized irrigation fund. And so we the city financed purchasing the saved shares as part of the Provo Canal Enclosure Project. Who knows how many years ago, 10 years ago or 15 years ago.
It was actually about 12 years ago, and I thought that was going to be paid off well before now. Are we still paying on that, Tyler? How many years does that go into the future?
I think we've got I think it's a total of 30 years on the term.
Wow. I'd like to go back to the agreement on that. I don't remember it being for 30 years.
Yeah, so
I thought it was more like 10 to 15.
On page 37, it talks a little bit more about that. So of the note payable amounts, about 1.37 million of that is due to Highland Conservation District. And it looks like those are going to be the final installment due in November 2035. So another 12, 13 years of that. You may have options to pay it off early. I don't think, as far as I recall, I don't believe the agreement has any prepayment penalties.
So we're paying $329,000 a year on that. Is that what that says? Is that what I understand?
So the $329,000 is what's left on the Utah Provo Rivers Association note. So the 1.3 million is part of that. I don't recall what was paid on that during the year, but during the year, let's see, we paid down about 95,000 between those two notes. So most of that would have gone to I think it was about 80 some odd thousand that went to the Highland Conservation District principal balance.
So on the next thing down, though, it says the original amount was 1.5 million, and we still owe 1.37.
I believe so.
10 years, 12 years later, we still owe most of the principal.
So
I was involved with that agreement, and I don't remember any of this being so.
Hold on, I think this is really important. Scott, you're bringing up a really important thing.
So you're saying we still owe, at this time, almost $1.4 million back on this?
Correct.
Tyler, do we have reserves that have been saved that when this comes due in November 2035 to pay it? Because it says it's due, I mean, it appears, it says principal and interest, it started on November 10th, and with the final installment on November 2035, well, are we going to have enough, I mean, is it fully amortize itself out and pay itself off?
Because we've not made much progress on the principal.
So there is some clarification that's needed on this as well. So initially, we had the 1.5 million. So now what also happens is if somebody moves into the Highland city limits, they bring those saved shares with them, the city assumes their proportion of the saved share liability as well. So during the year, we actually assumed another $121,000 of liability related to the Highland Conservation District. So if somebody moves in and they have saved shares and their shares were financed over time, now you get a bill that says, well, the number of shares you're paying off is, I don't remember what the number is, 125 or whatever it is now, instead of maybe 120 that it was last year. So it's been this, you're always assuming a portion of a liability if somebody's moving in with those saved shares.
Okay, now, hold it. So let's assume we have a bill to require 40 water shares to be able to develop. Are you saying that those shares can come in encumbered into the city? They have to be free and clear, don't they?
I don't know. All I know is that Highland Conservation
So
District
it's got to be
changes-
Ridgeview. They brought those in.
I can speak to that a little bit, Mayor.
Yeah, but why are we taking on, I mean, those should be coming in free and clear to the city. Why are we taking on liability? 'Cause
Yeah, why are
you're
we
saying-
gonna have to pay
You're
for
saying
it?
we're taking $122,000 last year liability with these shares coming in. I've never seen this before.
I've never have either, and I've been on the council 9 years.
Yeah,
And
so
I
this has
remember when we
happened-
passed this agreement with Provo River, and it
Fair.
wasn't $2 million.
I think I can give you a little bit of clarity. I don't know that I can offer
Yeah.
perfect clarity, but I think I can offer a little bit of clarity. So when the canal was buried, all of the users were assessed a portion of the burial costs.
And we agreed to
And
that,
so
yeah.
as we acquire additional shares, not just saved shares, but additional shares, our assessments that come from these companies that have to do with the burial of the Murdoch Canal, a portion of our monthly assessment, our yearly assessments go to pay the bill to Provo River Water Users Association, which took and amortized the cost of the burial over that 30-year period to each of the shareholders. So the more shares we acquire, the more bill we have, the more liability we have, because we have a portion of that long-term burial cost.
Could any shares come in free of that obligation, or does that make sense?
I'm sure we could structure it so they could. I just know that a portion of our assessment for each of the shares, our assessment per share, I don't remember what the per share assessment is right now, but whatever it is, a portion of that assessment is to pay back, essentially it's a debt owed to Provo River, who then pays their bonds with it, is the way I understand it. Tyler, you can
I'd like to
share a little
pull
light.
that, have that agreement, city administrator, see if you can find that agreement in November 2010, not tonight particularly. But I thought when that happened, we were buying the saved water shares from the enclosure. So they expected there would be a certain amount of water that evaporated, was stolen, different things. With the enclosure, it would prevent that, and that we were helping pay for those, which helped pipe the canal. So I'd like to see the actual agreement, because I don't remember us getting into agreement for $2 million or so. And I'd like to see how this all works, because it seems like we've been working on this now for almost 13 years or 12 years, and we're not even halfway into the principal. And that kind of bugs me, because this is the first I've seen this that I remember for some time. So I think it's great that you brought this up, because I thought, what are these notes payable for $1.7 million? Because I thought we were pretty much close to getting out of debt.
So there are.
I think it'd be a good thing to look at as well.
I'd like to look at it and see how it
I think that portion
works.
of that is to do with just each time we take on a share, we're taking on that assessment, and those companies are spreading that assessments across those shares. But I could be wrong and may need to be
Yeah,
corrected.
I'd like to understand it better.
So well, from Highland Conservancy District, there are two different assessments that come. There's one from the regular shares that, yes, as we get more shares, we get a higher assessment based on that. But then there is the saved shares portion where you're correct. That's where this liability came from, is that's Highland's proportionate share of
Of the save.
enclosing that, and we saved 10% or whatever shares they calculated back in 2010. So as those shares come in, that increases the assessment related to the saved shares as well. And so on each of their statements that the city receives, it says how many saved shares we're being, that we're paying on. And that's increased each year as we've looked at it as auditors. We look at that to say, again, what should the liability be? What do we owe? And now we have, I think 13 or 14 additional shares this year than was the previous year. I could be wrong. It's been several weeks since I've looked at that.
Well, I think Ridgeview brought some shares in like that, but.
And that could have been.
At the same time, I'd like to understand it better, because most of the water in that canal goes to Salt Lake, Jordan River. And I'd like to know how much we benefit from it, because we're certainly paying a lot for it.
Yeah, and that would be worth some discussion with Highland Conservancy District as well, to see if they're on the same page with what the city is in terms of, what is owed and things like that.
Well, and so just for public comments and things that way, we have different water shares. We have what's called comes out of the AF Canyon shares that flow, and it's just gravity fed into our system. Then we have canal shares, and this is what we're talking about, is the stored water shares.
Yeah,
we require that a developer can't just give us we need stored water. That comes out of up there at Deer Creek and comes down through the Murdoch Canal, and then we divert, starting if it be July or, somewhere, we then start diverting that from the canal into our irrigation ponds. So both shares kind of work. One doesn't have this assessment though, so Andy, the ones that are the AF River, if you want to say, they don't have this assessment. It's these saved shares, which is what we're saying, the ones
From
that
the canal.
are from the canal, and it's all this canal aspect. So not all shares coming in would have this.
Correct. What we require is 50% of the shares that a developer gives the city have to be what we term saved water or stored water. Because as we know, the canyon is really heavy. When I say the canyon, meaning American Fork Canyon, is really heavy in the spring. We get a lot of flow in the spring, and then somewhere between June and July in a normal year, it starts to taper down, and then that's when we call for our water that is our stored water, as you were explaining, Mayor, that supplements us through the balance of the summer and the early fall, when the flows are significantly down in the canyon. And so while this does carry a heavy assessment with it, it also carries a lot of value to us, because it provides us that second block of water in the year that sits up there in Deer Creek and waits for us to need it.
So Tyler, I think one of the action items coming up, we'd like just to understand this water share, water liability, is an assessment we're taking on, which would, or is it a liability that has a loan owed against it? If you want to say, and could we pay that off? Meaning we would require those developers to bring them free and clear into the city or things that, I think we just need to understand.
I want to see if we can't pay this off fairly quickly on good years.
Where do the funds come to pay that? That's out of the pressurized irrigation?
Correct. So the financials for the pressurized irrigation fund are on page 18 and 19, if you were curious. And these financials are available on the state auditor's website, so anybody in the public can go download a copy as well, or I'm sure Tyler could email a copy, because we have electronic copies as well. You can use this to help you fall asleep on a Friday night or something like that.
I was just going to say
It's riveting.
I prescribe this to my patients. Can't sleep, read this.
This is a lot of good information, though. I mean, I make light of it, but
good stuff.
there is a lot of good information, and I do recommend people look through the management's discussion analysis as well as the footnotes, because in the footnotes that explains a little more in detail what's going on as well. So it is good reading if you're interested in it.
Any other questions, council? Okay, we appreciate you coming tonight, and I'm sure if there's other questions, we can reach out to you, since we had not received this earlier than tonight, so it's just something we've received tonight. So.
Right. Yeah, feel free to reach out to me. I know some of you probably have my email. If not, Tyler has it. Email me with any questions you have about the audit. Happy to help.
Okay.
Thank you.
We will now move on to our consent items. We have one consent item, number 3A, which is an action planning commission appointments. Is there a motion or discussion?
I'd like to make a motion. Or either one of any of these, I didn't think they were here, I didn't see them, okay. I'd like to move the Highland City Council approve consent item 3A, Planning Commission appointments, which include Audrey Moore and Claude Jones.
I'll second.
Are we going to be doing electronic voting? Okay. That passes 5-0. I'm sorry, what was your question? There is no minutes on, but there is no minutes at this time, correct? Okay, we'll now move on to item number 4, which is a public hearing concern and a resolution. This is about the financial year 2022-2023, the mid-year budget adjustments. Tyler.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Good to be with you. This item is one that is a common occurrence. Throughout the budget year, we look for opportunities to true up the budget to events and occurrences that have shifted or may have shifted since the budget was adopted. So we're considering the current fiscal year 23 budget that the council approved in 2023, or excuse me, in June of 2022. Today's adjustments are the mid-year adjustments, and then we'll present towards the end of the year final adjustments for your approval. Now, point out that the majority of these adjustments have been presented to and approved by you in prior meetings. So staff has gone through, and we meet on a weekly basis, identifying things in each council meeting that, okay, that particular item wasn't included in the budget, so we'll make sure that we're including that for formal approval with the public hearing. A few items, relatively minor in terms of dollar amount, that have not been presented to you previously, and we called these out individually in the report as well. But for your consideration here, staff holiday expenses had previously run through a revenue account to increase transparency. We want to make sure that runs through a specific enterprise account, or excuse me, an expense account. And will be funded by the same funding source as it was previously, which is cashback rewards from the use of the credit card.
Tyler,
yes.
Can I just ask about that? What do we use this credit card for? I mean, we've got the cash back, so you used it for some expenses for the Christmas party, but what all do we pay with this credit card?
There's a variety of expenses. The most notable is actually the waste management charges. So we pay it on the credit card because there's not an additional fee. And then we get a significant return back on that. Staff will go through whether they're making a purchase with a credit card or with a check. The approval processes are the same. So if it's over $25,000, as is waste management, that comes to the council. Anything above $2,500 is going to cross Aaron's desk. So whether that's a credit card or another form check, the approval process is the same, and staff can attest to the joys of reconciling the credit card. Candace is very good at that. So.
Now, when we see $6,500, that is not just spent on the Christmas party. Aaron, maybe you can address how that $6,500 was spent when it says staff holiday expenses, what that actually went to.
You're right. It's not just the Christmas party itself. That would be one Christmas party, but one awesome party. But no, it also has to do with, we do a small bonus. We do some gifts, a small gift, like a gift card actually to a grocery store, as well as some small cash bonuses. And that's the bulk of that money, what it goes towards.
So let me make a comment. I think this is fine and different things, but this is the first time I've been on the council that I knew we were paying for some of our expenses with a credit card to get bonus points back. Did you know that? I mean, you're mayor, obviously.
I'm trying to think, last year, would we have some, and I think we just put it in the budget, or But this year, I was aware that they were going to use it, because it came up to be very, like, for the ham and some expenses that way. We used the bonus money to give a ham to them.
Yeah, and I think it's fine, I just didn't know we were paying all of our garbage fees on credit card.
I didn't know it.
Yeah.
And I think the program changed shortly before I came to the city. I don't know how long before there was cash rewards that were coming back in that form, but the program did change, and actually in our favor. The police and fire department also have a similar program that funds come back on.
So are there other areas where we could do this? Could we pay Provo Water River users on a credit card and get some bonus
might
points?
need to ask.
We ask all the time. Other companies, similar to what Highland City has done, passes on any convenience fees, so you end up paying 4 or 5% to get 1 to 2 back. But
okay.
so we do ask for those opportunities if it's available. Yeah. Great question. Building inspection, simply due to volume, use of external consultants, as well as some overtime. That's all covered by building permit revenue. Some staffing items there, minor staffing items with communications, and a recorder intern who did some great work helping catalog some documents. And then a number of items for the library. I honestly have to tip my hat to Donna. If your finance director was hit by a bus, I'd nominate her to take over. She's fabulous. So what you're seeing here, some tweaks and truing up some revenue, making use of those. Also received more in grants than anticipated. Is there anything that you'd like to add to that, Donna?
What's that? Oh, no, that's fine.
So can you tell us about the grants, Donna? I know you get a state grant, state library grant. Where else did you get grants?
So this year, in this fiscal year, we received our regular CLEF grant, which we get every year just by being certified as a certified library. But we also received $12,000 in ARPA grant money to buy books, and we received $1,500 to buy a foreign language collection grant. We bought Spanish and Chinese books. And then we received an LSTA grant to buy STEM kits for kids.
Very good. I think what Tyler's mentioning when you talk about Donna, you notice that there's the expenditures happening in the library have revenue to go and offset it. So it's not an increase that they're asking to come out of any of the general fund budgets or anything. They've got, hey, we've got the increase already in revenue, and this is how we'd like to spend it. So that's where he's talking about you're a good accountant at doing that.
Very good. Yep, exactly, Mayor. Thank you. One other item new for your consideration: newsletter printing costs have been higher than anticipated, primarily due to inclusion of inserts in the newsletter this year. So slight increase there of $2,400. Any question on any of those items there on this screen? The remaining items here, and there's a few pages, happy to go into any detail that you'd like. These you have seen and approved in various council meetings since the beginning of the fiscal year. So once the budgets that are approved, staff immediately starts to implement, and inevitably within the first week or two, there's already a budget adjustment identified, which is just fine. That's anticipated. So as you look over these items, I'd ask you if there's any that you have any particular questions about. Happy to go through any of them in any detail, but want to be respectful of your time.
Just maybe for the public, there's item number 2, which is city administrator severance and vacation payout. That is, we made a change in the city administrator, and that was our contractual obligation based on an employment agreement. So,
How much was that vacation payout?
Approximately half of that amount you see there.
That was accrued vacation days.
Correct. Okay. next section. And you see some larger dollar amounts here. I'll point out that one at the top, we did receive $1 million grant directly as a result of that $100,000. So that's the contract for the consultant. You'll see Mountain Ridge Park and the PA meter purchases are, those two make the vast majority of the amendments that we're requesting here at this time. There's fund balance, and in the case of Mountain Ridge, a variety of sources have been transferred at the council's direction to make that possible.
Can I actually ask a question on the executive consulting for the grants?
Sure.
So we received the $1 million grant. Is he now working on an additional grant? So we're still paying him, or we paid him, so I'm just interested in what's next. Like, what's our next grant? What is he working on? I just don't want him to stop. Hey, we got you the one grant. You got to get a return on your money. I'm moving on.
Right. Good
So
question.
that maybe to answer that, we actually met with the consultant, me and Andy, I believe it was the beginning of January, and we decided we wanted to go through the legislative session because we recognize sometimes the legislators might free up certain funding for grants or do certain things, where it might open up. And so we've decided right after the legislative session to meet with this, and then come in and say, okay, where are some areas that we see that we might be able to meet if it was some grants or some things the legislators have done on funding. So yeah, I'm hoping to get 3 bites. We've got,
Okay. You're on it.
Once again, we paid $100,000, we've received $1 million grant, but I'm hoping, we can get 2 more bites at the apple of some other grants, so.
We actually did receive that check today. $1 million.
Woohoo!
It was a great day.
And that grant is for the culinary water building, I understand, right?
Correct.
Let me ask you a question on the Mercer Corner landscaping. So the residents there raised a fair amount of money.
Mm-hmm.
I know over 70,000 went through the foundation. So the other 65,000 came from the sale of open space neighborhoods because they're an open space neighborhood, is that right?
Correct.
And that made up the difference
Mm-hmm.
from sales in various pieces, okay.
Right. And those proceeds, the revenues came in prior fiscal years. Now the work has been completed, and so this is.
Is that project all done and complete now?
I believe so.
So Tyler,
Yes.
and I don't know if this is this the slide, if it's going to come on. I've spoken with Tyler about the Mountain Ridge Park and how that funding was going to play in, because I know we have a lot of funding going towards the park. There might have been some mid-year adjustments. Is this at this appropriate time, or is there a slide you have down later on?
I don't have a separate slide. Aaron and I had a conversation about that earlier today. Are there any particular questions that you have about the funding sources for the park?
So what funding are we trying to do for Mountain Ridge Park? So there's the bonds, we just went through our audits. We have left on the one bond about, I think it's the parks, we still owe about $3 million, is it?
Correct.
So we owe $3 million. As a council, we felt like that doesn't come due till 2027.
Correct.
And I asked you to kind of forecast. So right now, we have enough money in the parks account to pay off that bond. But we have 4 more years until that, and we can't pay it early. They will not allow us, by our contractual obligation, to pay this bond early. We have to kind of pay it along. Am I stating things correctly?
You're spot on.
So I've asked you to forecast if we use some of that money, which is, once again, these are impact fees. As new individuals move in, we charge a park impact fee. As a council, we've talked about, hey, the reason there's a park impact fee is to go to help build parks. And we're in the middle of building a park. And so we want to use some of that funding, but we're also nervous. We want to make sure we have adequate funding when this bond is to come due, because there's a balloon payment at the end, that there's funding that's there. As you have done your forecasting, share with us what's historically been our permits that we've, the funds that have come into that parks, and what are you forecasting to come for the next 4 years? What is it we need to have happen to be able to do that?
Great question, Mayor, and appreciate the heads up so we could put some pen to paper today. You may recall that we have anticipated, or we are looking to use, $1 million of fund balance that came from impact fees. To make up that $1 million over the next 4 years, we would need to pull, or have billers pull, an average of 47 permits per year.
Are those residential homes, or can they be townhomes? What will be that makeup?
I took the average of the two. So the rate for a single-family residence is about $5,900, and a multifamily unit per door is $4,800. So using the average of those two then resulted in the 47 per year. It's a total of 188 units over the next 4 years.
So can I ask, what's a multifamily unit?
So
We don't have apartment buildings in the city. So you're talking about the townhomes?
Correct.
Okay, so the whole townhome building is charged a certain thing, not individual townhomes?
Each individual townhome is charged, yes. So because it's the impact is generally slightly less, and the number of residents in that unit is generally fewer than a single-family residence. That's why the rate is lower. But yes, for every door, there is an impact fee charged. It's just slightly lower.
Because some of the townhomes up in Ridgeview are 4-bedroom.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but what they're saying,
Yeah.
if someone comes in and builds a single-family home on a lot, they're paying $5,900. You come in and you have a townhome that has 4 doors, each door is paying $4,000 or $16,000 for that townhome, correct?
Okay,
Now,
for the whole building.
Yeah, for the whole,
Yeah.
so now my question is it 47, whatever the mixture is that we need to have each month, each year? So if I have 47 townhomes that go in, that will take, if we do that 47 times 4, the 188, if we do 188 units, we have enough funds that in 4 years, we'll be able to do that.
Correct.
And right now up in this, I'm just trying to think of, right now in Ridgeview, we have 689 units that were approved. Of that, Andy, are you going to guesstimate, is it about 200 that have come in, pulled permits, paid their fees on? Is that about, I don't know if Kelly, is that about accurate?
Well, the original development was 239.
There are about
Yeah.
430 that have not yet.
Yeah.
That have not paid fees?
Correct. That have not pulled permits.
So we still have 400 of those to come in. What historically has happened in Highland now? Now, let's go back. If we did not have Ridgeview come in, how many permits historically have we been doing a year? And we recognize, everyone goes, well, are you in a recession? Maybe in certain things we're not, but maybe we're having a housing recession. And so that's why I'm trying to ask all these numbers of what's going on.
Specific numbers I have to pull there, but it's north of 100. Even in a bad year, it's been generally north of 100.
What would you class, I mean, really, if you go for the last 10 years, we haven't had a bad year.
That's true.
We had a bad year in 2010, because I think there were only about 25 or something that were.
But so council, that's your information, is we're making decisions on the park to move $1 million out of what we have set apart in that fund. We need to do 47 units per year with a mixture of everything. We have about 400 still left that could come into Ridgeview. My estimation, and Andy, help me, looking up there at Ridgeview, it appears the single-family homes or the Ivory portion is slowed way down, which are single-family lots. However, the townhomes, which Lennar and the David Weekley and the Boyer, still seems to be moving forward. That I'm just seeing them putting infrastructure in. So that side, how many single-family homes does Ivory still have they haven't built out? I'm just trying to make sure what we're looking at. Because our guesstimation is that.
Yeah, that's
about 100.
Okay.
They have the cottage ones that are.
Yeah, the little cottage coming in that we approved.
But that's a little bit of a senior shop.
The senior housing, yes.
Okay. So anyway,
Hey,
there's information.
Kelly, how many permits have been pulled for 10700?
Just one for that model home.
No, plus they did the brownstones. They did
Oh,
the-
yeah,
the
dirt. That's 10.
Okay.
sorry, so technically 11. They do have one that's under review for next to the model home, but.
Okay. Any other questions about the budget? I'm sorry, I kind of diverted a little bit there, but it just, I've been just worried about, hey, if we're moving money to finish the park, we could have adequate funds in
cover.
4 years to make sure right now we have the funds. I don't want to move something if we're not going to have the funds.
Right, and Mayor, appreciate your questions because the budget is an annual document, right? It's created, then it goes to sleep, and we bury it at the end of the year. But obviously, there's an impact down the road, and so appreciate those questions that help us be forward-thinking.
Tyler, I just want to say thank you. This information is really easy to understand, and I especially like the description where you put what meeting it was approved at. Like, that's all very helpful, so thank you.
You're welcome, thank you. So the last page, some smaller dollar amounts, but again, each one of those that have come before you and received your approval. Any questions on those?
Tell me about the Utah Lake Commission, because we no longer have a representative there. Do we still have to pay them money?
They require a 365-day breakup notice.
They broke up with us.
Yes, and we have noticed our intent to complete the
There is a
breakup.
new bill that is now going through the state legislators that states for the Utah Lake Commission, those who are only ones that can be on the board are those who, the cities that can be on the board have to physically be around the border of the lake.
And the Chamber of Commerce.
And so the question came about the Utah Lake Commission. As a city, I think the council, where we sent a letter that we are no longer wanting to be part of it. We don't have a voice in it, and so, we're not going to be paying the fund for it. We sent that letter earlier on.
So you'll see some significant totals there. The revenue that we've proposed for amendments exceeds the expenses. Due to that line you see three above, utility revenue, and that's because when the council approved the budget back in June, it was the same night that you also adopted new utility rates, and one of the most significant shifts was culinary water. And so that revenue figure there is truing up the budget to reflect the revenue we're actually receiving this year. Very much needed. We delayed some projects this year because of lack of funding, and now we'll be able to move forward with those. So, any questions on that slide overall? All right. So this is a document that you've seen the last 2 years, a summary of fund balances, and the balances that you see here in...
Is there a way to enlarge that?
It's in your packet. I'm sorry, Kelly, is there a way?
I think.
So I'm showing this, the intent was to kind of walk you through what each of the columns were, and I'd be happy to circulate the document again. It's what you saw in the packet as well.
Okay, you're only showing the one you have here is on page 21, and yours is all the columns, not just this one single one.
This is a little bit of a reveal, so.
Oh, okay. I am sorry.
Don't get ahead of me, Mayor.
I just took your thunder away.
Is that the
These
one that's
balances that you see are directly quoted from the statement that Steve just presented to you this evening. Okay, so from the audited financial statements. As of June 30, what were the balances in each of those funds? We are then also sharing what's the net impact that was planned in the original budget, okay, whether an increase or a decrease. You see in the general fund, we had anticipated an increase from net revenue. This column here includes if we were looking towards year end. So that is the first figure plus or minus the second figure, and then where would we end up at the end of the fiscal year. This next column is if you approve the budget amendments that are before you tonight. So some of those are significant shifts. I would point out, and here are some notations, some context for you. The budget nor the amendments, do they include some notable figures such as PI grants that Andy's team has worked very hard on. So as you look at the pressurized irrigation fund and see less than $1 million anticipated at the end of the year, that does not include grants that the timing of which is not exactly known, but there's significant funding that's coming from that. So that fund the fund balance will be much larger there next year. So, any questions about the overall?
So once again, your top line is general fund. We are estimating at the end of our year, June 30th, 2023, that we will have $4,174,982,000, and that will be representing about 35% of the fund balance, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So we'll be back up. So even though, Scott, we said, hey, we're going to bring it down to 27, going through this year, we bring it back up to the 35%.
Right. And you have a question, Councilman?
Well, the thing is, though, for years, we kept the fund balance, I think, at 25 to 28%. So we're allowed to go up the last 2 or 3 years. So the argument has always been, do we need to maintain a 35% when we've got some big projects like the Mountain Ridge Park and different things? And so last year, we said we could go down to 27%, because it's still above what we used to do for years.
Right.
I mean, so just because they allow us, do we need to have 35%?
And that changed, I think, was about 2 years ago. It was increased from 25 to 35%. So you're absolutely right.
So I think we have an ongoing discussion when we need to try to finish this park.
And that's that potential for revenue to the park has been contemplated, and as we've met, Andy, Aaron, and myself, we're constantly looking at that. And once the year gets close to closing out, or we close that out, then we'll be in a position to offer that up.
One other note as you look at this document, Council, I mean, you'll notice the big watermark on it that says draft. It is just that at this point, because it's your decision right now tonight about budget amendments, but then also really as you look at this, there's only one set of numbers that staff can guarantee for you, and that's the balance that Steve presented to you earlier that's in that second column, right? So everything that happens in between, we have a budget for, but of course things are going to continue to change. And so those final numbers, please don't look for them at the end of the year because they won't be there. But this hopefully gives you an approximation of, based off of where we were at last fiscal year, plus what you've decided to approve for this fiscal year, that's where we guesstimate we will be at. But again, it is a guesstimate, though a very educated one that
So
Tyler
Council, to
has
help
worked
you,
hard on.
Right towards the bottom, you have capital, it's in the darker blue, capital improvement fund for parks. Right at the end of this last, I would say physical, but the financial year, we had $7,750,000. We anticipate going and spending. This is the money we have saved apart. So what we're anticipating at the end of this year, if we use the money for the park, for Mountain Ridge Park, we will have about 1.6 million sit there for the bond payments, and we need to have 3 million by 2027. That was what I was talking about. We just got to make sure that
we
in
have
4
enough.
years that we have that 3 million. Because I mean, we're going to be making payments each year, but that last year in 4 years, we need $800,000 sitting there to pay and get rid of that bond. So that was kind of that. Just want to make sure. Okay.
If no, they're happy to take any other questions you have.
If there are any questions, we need to have a public hearing, but is there questions council has before we go to public hearing? Being none, at this time, we'd like to open up item number 4, public hearing resolution for the financial year 2022-23 mid-year budget adjustments. Is there anyone here that'd like to come up and address the council pertaining to that? Seeing none, we'll now close our public hearing and bring it back to the council.
If there's no further questions, I'll make the motion. So I move that the Highland City Council approve the resolution adopting the proposed fiscal year 2023 mid-year budget adjustments as explained to the council this evening.
I'll second. I'm going to give, so I'll give it to Sarah. So Scott did the motion, Sarah was a second. Any other discussions before a vote? No, let's go ahead and go to vote. Yes? Okay, so before we, Tim, what's your vote? Okay. That passes 5-0.
Thank you.
We'll now move on to item number 5, which is an action item. It's approval of a special recognition and naming rights agreement. Aaron Wells, if you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Appreciate it, Kelly. Mayor and Council, this all has to do with Mountain Ridge Park and some really exciting news that we have for you. Well, not new news, but completion of news. So ultimately, beginning with the end in mind, we're recommending that you approve the naming rights agreement that was in your contract or in your packet with Mr. Paul Adams, who's offering to donate $500,000 towards the All Abilities Playground at Mountain Ridge Park. So if you remember earlier this year, we brought forward this agreement to you to kind of approve as what we would want to use with individuals wanting to donate to the park. Council asked us to bring it back to talk more about kind of the threshold for different naming rights for items. So this is the first execution of the agreement that we're going through. Like I said, Paul Adams is a resident who lives near the park who's offering to donate $500,000. He wants the money to be focused towards the All Abilities Playground. And then this agreement, we've talked through the agreement, but one of the main things is it would allow Paul and his wife to select a name to be placed at like a monument near the playground to honor his donation. And this donation would not prohibit others from donating to the playground. We actually have already had other individuals donate money to the playground through the foundation that we've received those funds for. So we wouldn't prohibit any other donations. This certainly would be our most significant individual donation to this point. For your reference, the playground costs $2 million, so this would be a 25% donation. Mayor asked me to pull these in today, so this is the latest and greatest image of what we're looking like for the entryway monument. So in addition to, when somebody is donating for naming rights to a item like the playground, they'll get their name on a monument near that item, or like on a pavilion, we'll probably put a placard on the pavilion itself. But in addition to that, we've talked about an entryway that will include the list of everyone who's donated to the park. And so this is kind of the latest and greatest rendering of that. Because of budget costs, we did end up having to shrink this a little bit by a couple of feet. So it originally was going to be a couple feet taller, but it's still significantly tall. And then, as we keep talking, it may or may not be called Mountain Ridge Park, but whatever we do end up calling it would be kind of a sign above the entryway itself. And there, kind of on the interior part of the stone, is where we would etch the names of the different donors within that. So I think, yes, I have a motion to approve for you. I changed the wording just slightly of this, of $500,000 towards the All Abilities Playground, just to clarify the fact he's not the only donor for this playground. But if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Otherwise, there's your motion, Council.
So have they come up with any names that they want to name this?
I think it's in your agreement here. They have it down, the statement they'd like to have recognized, and I'd have it recommended that we put the wife's name in here also. It is Paul and Rachel Adams. So the agreement with Paul and Rachel Adams for the donation.
His email that he did send to us, Mayor, said, I get to choose the name later, though, don't I? And I don't know if you had further conversations with him. So
I have not. What the anticipation is, they'd like to have so the playground, you need to be aware, they think that there may be on the maps, it might say the Paul and Rachel Adams playground. They're naming the playground area, and have a plaque or a notice, that's not, there by the playground, showing that they've made a major donation to the playground. They're okay if individual playground items have other little plaques by them saying, hey, this rocking swing was donated by XYZ family,
but they like to have their name as the recognition towards the playground, as the All Abilities Playground there. So any questions that way? And it is, I'm sorry, Aaron is correct. On all of these, I think it's, they might want to, name it just the Adams Playground. They might want to name it after some children or something that way. So they were asking, my understanding in the agreement, that would still need to come back to us, Rob, to make sure that that name was acceptable to us? Or do we need to have that as part of the motion?
No, the agreement itself says that we can review and restrict names, just make sure it's, not offensive or doesn't harm the reputation of the city.
Yeah. Okay.
I'd like to make a motion if we're ready. I move that the City Council approve the special recognition and naming rights agreement with Paul and Rachel Adams for a donation of $500,000 toward the All Abilities Playground at Mountain Ridge Park, and authorize the mayor to sign the agreement.
I'll second it.
I have a motion by Kim, second by Scott. Is there any other further discussion? If not, let's go ahead and move to vote. Tim, would you like to go ahead and roll call? That was a yes by Councilmember Ball. It passes 5-0.
Can I ask the city administrator to have more motions like this? These are great.
Right? I actually do have good news. We do have one more in the works that we anticipate coming that will be a wonderful donation as well. And then after that, we want to come back to council and we'll give you an update as to kind of where we're at on the finances of Mountain Ridge Park and the timeline and things of that nature. So.
Okay. We'll now move on to action item number 6, which is a plan amendment of Canterbury Circle Plat D. And Kelly, we have you down as doing that.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. Just a little bit of background. Canterbury Circle Plat A was approved by the council back in 2000. It was an open space subdivision, so it included open space going throughout. Native open space wasn't maintained, no trails around it, and so in 2013, the council approved the designation of that open space behind the lots for disposal, and each of those property owners did purchase. This is the vicinity map here. If you follow my mouse, that's all that open space that ended up being disposed of and those property owners now own. If you remember a year or two ago, this property owner went through the same process, the plat amendment process, to combine their lot with the parcel. And so now I commend Richard and Christy Henderson. They are present tonight, but they worked with 10 other property owners in this subdivision to make this plat amendment clean and get all of these combined together. There were 2 property owners that wanted to exclude themselves from this plat amendment process, but then the rest of them did decide to move forward with it.
Which 2 are excluded?
I can't tell you their names offhand, but it was this property owner right here, and then this one, the furthest south.
Okay.
But they had purchased the property. It's just
Yes, they do own the property. This one actually reached out to me once he received his notice letter, to make sure that it wasn't affecting his property in any way, which I explained the advantages of combining, but he wanted to keep it the way it was.
So have we heard from all property owners then that this
Yes,
affects?
I have signatures from all these property owners, and then they will also have to sign the Mylar before recording. And that's the second page of this Mylar. I didn't include it in this presentation, but it is in this packet where each of them will have to sign. So this is the proposed plat amendment. A couple things to note. Obviously, there are 11 property owners that are participating in this. As part of the plat amendment process, they do have to send out they have to get letters from the utility companies to vacate the public utility easements that are along the property lines. CenturyLink actually has lines in these highlighted public utility easements right here and denied the vacation, and so we are keeping those on the plat and not requiring any additional PUEs in the new back property line. We're just keeping them as is. The rest of them will move. On this lot 9, we do have a city water line easement. That was actually a condition of sale back in 2013. There's also the other portion of this water line easement is on this other property that's not included in the plat amendment, but it is a recorded easement. And so that is also reflected on the plat. And then this is a proposed motion. Like I said, the applicant is present if you had any questions for them. Otherwise, this is a pretty simple lot parcel combination.
What are the
amendment.
two stipulations?
It is, I knew I should have pulled those up. They're both in the staff report, but it's basically that the Mylar will reflect the final, or the plat amendment that you're approving tonight, that there won't be any significant changes unless approved by the city engineer, where there may be some minor legal description changes. I think those are the only two.
I thought they were also going to be responsible to do a survey. Is that?
So, well, they already paid for the survey.
Okay, so the survey's done.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's what this plat is.
Okay, I just
They
wanna
already
make sure.
completed that, correct.
Okay. Any other discussion items or information?
I'll make a motion.
Okay.
So I move that the Highland City Council accept the findings and approve Canterbury Circle Plat D, subject to the two stipulations recommended by the staff, which is in the staff report.
I'll second.
Okay, I have a motion by Scott, second by Kim. We ready for a vote? Tim, how would you like to vote? Okay. That passes 5-0. We now move on to item number 7, which is resolution of the Highland Lehigh boundary adjustment. And Stephanie, do we have that? You're doing that?
Yes, thank you, Mayor and members of the council. Kelly, would you mind moving that slide forward for me? Thanks. So just a little background on this request. In 2019, there was an agreement that specified, it was between Lehigh and Highland, specifying the boundaries of the Dry Creek Lake as well as the surrounding properties. In 2020, there was a boundary adjustment that was completed. However, the surrounding properties was left off of that boundary adjustment. So today, the boundary adjustment that's brought before you is to include just those surrounding properties. The 2020 boundary adjustment made the boundary go down the middle of the lake, but we just forgot to put in the surrounding properties. Kelly, can you advance that slide? Thanks. So this graphic here shows you where those lines will be. There's the two parcels. The larger parcel on the top, that is the one that was actually included in the agreement. Down a little bit further, Kelly, that one right there, yeah. That's the one that's actually included in the agreement. It was acquired by Autumn Ridge Farms. That one was acquired in the agreement. The smaller little sliver parcel that you see down below is simply just to clean up our Highland City boundaries. Both of those parcels are already owned by Highland City. We're just moving them into our boundaries.
And have you had conversations with Lehigh? I think they're doing the similar.
Yes, yes. So our resolution is coming before you tonight. The resolution in Lehigh City is happening next Tuesday night. Kelly, do you mind moving that slide forward one more time? So here's the steps that you will need to be aware of. So our resolution of intent happens this evening. And then if that resolution is approved by you, then I will perform several different noticing requirements. It's extensive. And then you will have a public hearing and ordinance on May 2nd for your final approval of that boundary adjustment. And then I will perform several recording requirements to finish this up. And Lehigh City is also following the same steps. They're just about a week behind us. So, and then on the following slide, I believe there's that motion to approve. Any questions?
I'll make a motion. You guys ready? I move that the City Council adopt the resolution indicating the intent of Highland City to adjust a common boundary with Lehigh City and set a date of May 2nd, 2023 for a public hearing on the matter.
I'll second.
I have a motion by Kim, second by Sarah. Okay, we'll go ahead and move to vote. Tim, you're in? Okay. That passes 5-0.
Thank you.
We now will go to expedited items. We have item number 8A, which is resolution of disposal of public property. So it's a disposing of public property. And that is Andy Spencer, our city engineer.
Yes, Mayor and Council, we talked about this last meeting in that, and in your weekly report, you got photos of the Parks Department preparing Highland Glen for the new playground. And so as part of that work previously, when the council instructed us to order the new playground, he also instructed us to surplus the playground once the new playground equipment was available. And so that should be showing up soon. We've removed all the old parts. We've got them stored. But since we were doing this, we thought that we'd take the opportunity to pick up a few additional items. We've also got 3 lawnmowers that are no longer functional, and so we'd recommend surplusing them. And then we've got a couple of sewer lift stations that, again, we're storing, but really don't have use for at this point. And so we're doing a little house cleaning along with the playground, and would recommend that we surplus these 6 items. So happy to answer any questions.
Now the Dry Creek lift station pump, where's that coming from?
They pulled it out. I don't know why we've been hanging on to it this long. I asked Trevor how long we've had it, and he told me we've had it since 2008. That's a long time to be holding on to it, but it's one that we pulled out a long time ago, and we've just been storing. So
I'll make a motion.
Can I ask one question quick? So on the new lift station, you're putting, well, that's the sewer lift station in Pheasant Hollow.
yeah, it's a sewer lift station that's
So are you
underway.
going to surplus parts of the old station when you get this new one functional?
Yeah, eventually, yes, we will. Right now, we're not ready to surplus it because it's still in service.
Still in service, yeah.
But there'll be a day where we'll talk about that. And the way things go, probably the next time we kind of have a major item to surplus, we'll look at that.
So is there a market for these sewer pumps?
We're going to put them on the
Find out.
state website and find out. My guess is probably not much, but there may be a small special service district or something somewhere. Our current ordinance requires us to have the council take action on anything that's over $300 in value, which is something we'd like to talk about in the future and see, is that really, the reasonable limit to bring it to a council and take your time for and all of that. But I think we could probably scrap it for more than $300 at this point. It's heavy enough and things that way, so.
I'll make a motion. I move that the City Council approve the surplus of items identified in the staff report and authorize the resolution allowing for the appropriate disposition of these items in accordance with the Highland City Municipal Code.
I'll second.
I have a motion by Sarah, second by Kim. Ready for a vote? Passes 5-0. We now have staff communication and mayor communication items. We'll now go to item number 9A, which is seminary code update. And I believe that is Stephanie and our city attorney, Rob.
Thank you, Mayor and City Council. We will try to make this brief because we're all really anxious to get out of here even earlier tonight, so.
Don't count on it.
Hey, be careful. Okay, let's go ahead.
Well, I'm going to do everything in my power to make that happen, so, okay. So if you'll remember, we met back on December 6th. We had a work session where we talked a little bit about the cemetery code. We've been working on some extensive updates on that. In that discussion, we have made some adjustments in the code that will be brought back to you for your final approval. However, tonight we wanted to talk to you about a couple of things that were left undiscussed at that previous meeting, or that we did not have a decision on. The first one being headstone sizes. We discussed the possibility of doing a headstone requirement for height. We recommended 36 inches at the time. There was some discussion about council and mayor wanting to go out and look at the cemetery and kind of see what their thoughts were on that height. I don't know if any of you have had the chance to do that, if you have any thoughts on that that you'd like to share with us at this time.
I'm okay with, what we're saying is we're going to have the maximum height 36 inches. Some of the thought processes, we're having a problem with our sprinklers. If they're taller, they get dry spots. I thought that would still, is still a good height. I mean, it's 3 feet, so.
Okay, yeah, that's 36 inches from the ground. So if you're all okay with that, that's kind of the direction we'll go with our code, and you'll see that when it's time for final approval. Kelly, do you mind moving my slide forward a little bit? The other thing that we want to discuss tonight is plot transfers. First of all, why would we ever do a plot transfer? We have a few reasons that come up quite often. First of all, a resident will come in and he or she will purchase a plot for a non-resident family member, so that they get the resident rate, and then with the intent that they will in the future transfer them. We do have a $25 per plot transfer fee, so that's a significant savings if someone does that. Another reason why someone might want to do a plot transfer would be, for instance, if someone purchased a large number of plots and that maybe closer to that plot owner's death, he or she decides that they would like to transfer them into a son or a daughter or sister or brother or whoever's name they would like to transfer. So that's another reason why we do plot transfers. Another reason is sometimes a plot owner will allow a family member to be buried in a plot that is owned by them, which is totally fine. We allow that. But let's say that it's a child that is buried in that plot, and later down the road, the parents of that child would actually like to own that plot, which also makes sense that they would want to do that. So we would allow the plot owner to transfer that into those parents' names, those parents' names. So those are kind of some of the reasons why we would see that. Now, we do have some confusion on transfers. For starters, our code says that the burial right is for heirs forever. And it says right in here, it says, all legal heirs are presumed to have legal right to the rights of burial unless their heirship has been to the contrary, has been determined in a court of probate. So the heirs can be a little bit confusing in our code. That's a little bit of confusion. And then, to make it even more exciting, on our burial right purchase agreement, we stipulate non-transferable, period. And then on the certificate that we issue, it says that it is for the plot owner's heirs or assigns. And then finally, in our practice, what I typically do is I will allow a transfer for anyone in that plot owner's family. That could be going either way, either parent to grandparent, parent to child, parent to, or plot owner to any family member. So that is what the practice has been. What we're looking for tonight, some guidance that we would like from you. Who do we allow plot owners to transfer to? Is there a preference that you as council have? Do we care who people transfer their plots to? And then finally, when do we allow transfers? Is that when the person is still living, when the plot owner is still living? Do we want them to wait until they are deceased and we have to deal with wills and trusts and any other probate type documents that might come in? And then finally, we need to discuss resident and non-resident rates just briefly, very briefly tonight. So we have, we've kind of come up with 3 different options for you to consider. The first one is going to be the most restrictive, and then the least, and then finally moving to the least restrictive. Do you want to? Thank you. One thing that you do need to know about cemetery plots is that the living owners, the living plot owners, can always allow anyone to be buried in their plots. So say a person owns several plots and their neighbor's grandfather passed away. The plot owner can come in and they can authorize the burial of that person in a plot owned by them. We don't transfer the ownership, but we allow that person to be buried in that plot because the plot owner gave permission, okay? And then finally, any plot owner can always sell back their plots to the city. So just kind of keep those two things in mind. So option one, this is the very most strict option, which would be no transfers at all until the death of the plot owners, and then only through a will, a trust, or other testamentary document. So if the family had to go to probate, they would have to bring in those documents and prove that they were the legal heir or the responsible party through those
Okay,
documents.
You always think about the what if. So you have a neighbor pass away, and so you say, hey, I'll be kind, I'll give you a plot. But it's not in their name, it stays in the original owner's name. Well, a person's buried there. Now this person passes, the owner passes. You've got a non-owner that's buried. What happens?
So so that person would just be buried there in that person's plot. The plot would still be owned by the original plot owner, even if the plot owner is
If it's
deceased.
used, why does it even matter? I mean, it's good. You're buried there, they really don't, you know, they've taken care of the issue they wanted to on the property. I'm just trying to, I just wasn't sure.
Perhaps, maybe I'll add in why that might be complex. Say someone owns 20 plots. They allow their neighbor to be buried there. The plot owner dies. The neighbor's spouse then dies and says, I want to be buried next to my husband but that plot is only owned by a different owner. And that owner says, all of my plots go to my children. So suddenly, no one can be buried in those plots except for the owner's children, including the neighbor's spouse. So this is why we're dealing with this issue, and we haven't had to deal with it a lot because Highland Cemetery is still young. We will deal with this a lot over the next 50, 60 years.
Do we have a lot of people that have let a neighbor bury in their plot, though? I mean, are we bringing up an issue that's not really an issue?
It does not happen a lot, but that is not, it does not happen a lot that way. But we do have other situations that could kind of affect if we only allow plots to be transferred once that person's deceased.
Well, actually, I will tell you the one that probably has occurred. So I have plots. My brother and me, at the time, we thought, okay, we want to have a family plot. My sister-in-law had a family member's pass, and they were young enough, they were a husband and wife that passed and left children. Well, my brother ended up adopting the children, so they've buried those two parents. Does that make sense? But the relationship to me is totally removed. But yet, I know we did a transfer to get that all put together, but that's an incident that could happen where that would stay in my name. Interesting, okay.
And something recent we've implemented because of some uncomfortable situations we've seen is now we require verification that the plot owner is the one who's asking for a headstone to be set. And so if you're not right in that situation, I mean, it's not really you who's going to be ordering the headstone, right? As the plot owner, it's somebody else. And so we would prefer really it to be a close kin, right, to be the plot owner.
But this is option one that's fairly restrictive.
So you're saying then, because I own some plots, I bought them 3 years ago, and my purpose was to have a family plot because my grandparents, Smith, had a family plot, and my grandparents and their 3 sons, and the one son didn't live long enough to have a wife, but the 2 wives, and they're all married there, including my great aunt that didn't, who was my grandmother's sister. So it's kind of a family plot. But a lot of those decisions just passed down through a will, and that's kind of what I thought would happen because I bought enough plots for my kids because none of them seem to be doing that well that they could buy cemetery plots. So it's just kind of a provision so the family can be buried together. So I just have to have that stipulated in my will.
Correct. And option one is always available. This one is always available. If someone comes in and can prove to me through a will or a trust or some other legal document that they are indeed the plot, designated plot representative once the plot owner is deceased, then option one is always available. Just know that this option is always available. If it was the only option that we were going to choose, then I would ask you to make some considerations or read those considerations that If it's the only option for families to transfer plots, then you could end up with some situations where the trustee lives 5 states away and can't be here, and it might be difficult for families to find those documents to prove exactly who is the trustee or who is the responsible party with those plots. Could lead to a delay in some burials. And we do have probably a significant number of people out there who have purchased a large amount of plots that have their intentions on transferring those before they pass, or with the intent that they will be passed on to someone in their heirs, in their family.
I'm
So.
interested in what the next options are.
Okay, let's move to the next slide. Okay, this is option 2. This is kind of our current practice. This is option 1 plus option 2 is our current practice, I should say. So this one, we allow any living plot owners to transfer to any family member. So, Councilmember Smith, if you came in to me and said, I have 2 plots and I want to transfer them to my daughter, we'd be happy to do that. There's a fee that we charge for that, but we'd be happy to do that.
How much is the fee?
$25 per plot.
Okay.
Okay. So that is kind of what we do right now. We have a living plot owner sitting in front of me, and I can verify who they are. The form is notarized. It's a pretty simple process.
So I could do that tomorrow?
You could do that tomorrow.
I could transfer them to my daughter and her husband?
Yes,
Okay.
you could. Now, you have to also realize that once that plot is transferred to them, they have complete ownership of it, and they could sell it. They could do whatever they want with it. So.
And they would.
There you. All right. So one thing that we have found that's interesting with this option 2 is that I am really unable to verify when someone comes in and says to me, I want to transfer my plot to my sister, and they give me a female name. I don't know for sure if the person they're transferring them to is their sister. I can basically read that we're letting them transfer to anyone they want, but I tell them it needs to be transferred to a family member because that is what our code says.
Is there a legal definition of what is a family member?
Not in our current code.
Nope.
We're all family in the gospel.
There are state law standards we could use under like the probate code, and usually it includes, blood, marriage, adoption, those types of things. That would be part of the discussion is if we're doing it to family members, I would assume we'd want to include a pretty broad range of family members, but we'd have to address that in our code more specifically.
Yes. And that has been one of the things that, as we need to define who are the heirs. If someone comes in and says, I want to transfer this to my cousin, could that possibly be an heir? And if
As you've been going through some current practice, have you seen a lot of issues? Are we having a lot of residents saying, hey, this is too restrictive? Or have we been able to usually work through all situations and it's worked out okay for all the residents?
Usually we can work everything out. I will tell you that with plot transfers, the most that I've seen over the last few years is about 12 a year. So we're not looking at a huge amount of people, but the kind of the policies that we put in place now will be more important down the road when, like Rob said, when our cemetery gets older. Right now, we're really a young cemetery, and most of our plot owners are still living. But it gets really sticky when you have all the plot owners are deceased, and you have a family member coming in saying, I'm the heir, and you're like, well, do you have siblings? Do you have, are you sure you're the only heir? How are they going to prove that to you?
So I'll give it, for instance, there was one family plot in the Sandy Cemetery. It was in my grandfather's name. My dad was the last living relative, if you want to say sibling, child of that, and it became very evident that if we did not have my dad go sign it to someone, then I had to go get every cousin to sign off to have what would happen to that plot. And so, I actually had the conversation with my mom just last week. Are there any plots you're aware of? She's the last living relative of every, of all sides, that you're aware of. And because this is a concern. What do we need to get transferred? So,
yeah, it becomes really difficult when there's not a clear line of family representatives in that. And who are we to know? You know, we won't know that. They're the ones that have to prove that to us, so. Plots purchased, one of the other considerations that we have here is that we're seeing plots purchased at the resident rate and then transferred to non-resident family members. That happens quite frequently. One thing under option 2 that I like I've said before, it's easy to determine the legal plot owner because they are living and they're sitting right in front of me. And so I can work with them to kind of, the disposition of those plots is really easy while they're still living. Okay, so option 2. Option 3, this is the most broad interpretation. It would allow for transfers under option 2, which would include option 1 and 2. And then option 3, we can just allow living plot owners to transfer to anyone. We don't care if they're residents, non-residents, family members, friends, neighbors. We would allow them to transfer to anyone. If you choose this option, one of the biggest considerations is the resident and non-resident rate. So, because like I say, we do have people who you might want to consider looking at doing away with the resident, non-resident rate. If you choose just transfers to everyone, then it really doesn't.
Because people could take advantage of
people wouldn't, yeah, there wouldn't be that.
Can we, for option 3, can we say if you would like to transfer to a non-resident, non-family, you need to pay the difference between the resident and the non-resident rate at the time of transfer?
Yeah, I mean, we're open for suggestions how you would like to have that handled.
I have a question, since you've been doing this for a while. What do you think is the kindest and most gentlest way to do this while still having it be feasible for you to manage, right? What do you see?
I really like to have the option for the plot owner who's still living to come in and visit with me. I think that that's really an important piece of this, that while someone is still living, they can handle their affairs and get things the way that they want it to be. So option 2 is comfortable for me because that's what I've been doing. Option 1, and of course that includes option 1. But I do see occasionally where that resident, non-resident rate is used to purchase plots for people that ultimately are not residents.
Because under option 1, can you go back to option 1? It seems difficult for families at time of death to find documents. It just seems like you don't want to do anything in that moment to make it more difficult.
Exactly, yeah.
So I would say no to that.
I'm leaning towards option 2.
Okay.
I'm supportive of option 2 or option 3, but making them pay the difference between the resident and the non-resident rate if it's not a family member.
But Sarah, can't they come in
That's
right?
complicated
But
then.
they can come in right now, even underneath option 2, and buy a plot as a non-resident. Is that it?
Right. But I'm just saying, let's say I own 3 plots, and 2 I'm using for family members, then I have a friend that says, hey, gosh, I'd really like to be buried in Highland. I'm like, well, I guess I could sell it.
It could be like a
Right.
business that somebody could be running as a resident and selling
Yeah.
plots at a,
So I guess option 2.
A little bit
is
of profit.
probably-
yeah.
Do we have, once again, what's the concern? Why would someone come and buy a plot that's not a resident? Why are we lower in the value than other cemeteries? Do we have one that sits on a hill by a mountain, so they want to be by mountains? I mean, what's the reasoning a non-resident that doesn't have family in the area that you hear why they'd want to be buried here?
It's a beautiful cemetery. That's what I hear all the time. This is the most beautiful cemetery around, and we've looked at all of them. That's what I hear all the time.
So my understanding,
So-
Alpine, you can't buy a plot unless you're a resident. So if you're not a resident, they do not do any non-residents. It's all residents. And some it's because they're an older cemetery, they're running out of plots. We have sold about 1/3 of our plots. And am I thinking right, Stephanie? About 1/3's been sold?
Yeah.
So we're a young cemetery, so we have space. What about American Fork? What are some of the, really, I guess we have Lehigh, American Fork, and Alpine that they could also choose. I appreciate them, think we have a really pretty cemetery, we're newer, but some of it, we might not be as restrictive either.
Is that what you're hearing too?
I don't hear a lot on restrictions, but really, they're just drawn here because they walk in there and it's a beautiful place to be. I hear they can see the mountains, and they love the mountains, and they love the cemetery. That's the number one reason why we would have, or we will have people who live in American Fork or some of these surrounding cities who can't find the number of plots next to each other, so they will come here.
So I assume it's beautiful for the people that come to visit. Because if I'm dead, I probably won't care.
It's all about that, Scott.
Yes, that's right.
So you say it's about a third full, so at our current rate, when will it be full?
I ran some numbers about 6 months, 8 months ago, and about 50 to 60 years.
For the current death rate.
That feels like
Yeah, I think the 50 was during the COVID years, that we were seeing a lot more activity. 60, I think, is more of an average. So, and it really depends too. You know, we offer so many different options in our cemetery for double deep burials, parent-infant, cremations. We offer a lot of options. So there's a lot of room for people in our cemetery.
And people can buy as many as they would like for themselves and their family.
Yes, they can.
I mean, that is attractive. You can come in
Yes.
and have a family plot. And if you go to cemeteries that are a little older, I mean, that's what really drew us, is going, hey, we can do family plots instead of just having two. But with that, so council, let's give a little, I've heard a couple for option number 2. Is there anyone strong in option 3, or only keeping option 1, or are most of you feeling option 2?
I lean towards option 2.
Okay, so option 2 does include option 1 as well.
Correct.
So that's kind of the backup. So if someone does pass away and has not taken care of what they need to, I can still rely on the court documents. Okay. Kelly, would you mind transfer?
Was there?
Going forward.
What do you use to verify relationship?
And that's one of the downfalls. I don't have a way of knowing if a person that they come in and say, I want to transfer this to my sister, and they give me a name and an address, and I have to take them for their word.
DNA.
So that is one of the downfalls of that.
Can't they just prove their relationship then?
I'm not sure how, I'm not sure how they would do that.
I mean, you could do a spit test, you could, do a blood draw, kind of thing like that, hair
Well, you could
follicles.
bring in your ancestry report.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm just being facetious.
Is there a way to do that?
No,
I mean, it's one of the things of, depending on how you define family, they may not be related by blood, may be married, or be married.
Or adopted.
Adopted,
Adopted.
and then by marriage, so you're, several degrees out, but you're still part of family.
Are we allowed to define?
We can for this, because you can set your own rules for the cemetery. This is kind of a unique
Really?
circumstance. It's, the management of it, though, I don't know, and it's also a little awkward sometimes if they say, hey, this is my brother, and you say, well, you don't look anything alike. I need you to somehow prove, give me an adoption. I don't think Stephanie really wants to be doing that.
No, especially not if we're dealing with the burial. Just really briefly, so we'll move forward pursuing option 2, which includes option 1 and option 2 together, so thank you. Resident, non-resident plot rate, just briefly think about that. We do see a lot of people coming in and purchasing plots for family. It's usually family members because they know they can't transfer it to a neighbor. So it's usually for a family member with the intent that they're going to transfer it over at a later date. If we were to remove that resident, non-resident plot rate, that would discourage that kind of thing from happening. The reason it does require a lot of extra paperwork and steps when you have to transfer a plot. And those who forget to transfer the plot, it causes a lot of confusion in the family. And like I said, you won't see that a lot right now, but as this cemetery gets older and as those plot owners get older, you will find you end up with a lot of plots that are not owned by the person that actually thinks they were owned by them. I actually visited with the family this afternoon, and he said, I have 6 plots. And I pulled up his name, and I said, no, you have 4. And he said, no, I have these 2 as well. And I said, they're not in your name. And he said, well, I paid him for them. And I said, well, As far as Highland City goes, those plots are owned by a different person. It was his son-in-law, I think. So I said, well, you'll need to make sure that he comes in and transfer those into your name. Just because he had paid him for them, that would be an area of confusion for that.
And I can see if you have family being buried and other families to say, they're not here, but they'd like to stay with the family plot. So I guess you're saying that's where they'd buy it, but that individual is not a resident, so.
Yeah, yep, right. So we've kind of talked about the three options that you identified, that options you'd like. If we decide to maintain the non-resident and resident rates, that's a question I'd like you to think about. It will be factored in, depending on what you think on that, it will be factored into the Zions Bank Perpetual Care Fund study, which is still in the works. But that is something that we would probably like to include in the study because that will affect our, the rate will affect our perpetual care. So. And if you did decide to change that fee, we would stay status quo until the study is complete. If you decided you wanted to move ahead with removing that resident and non-resident rate, we would just stay status quo until the rate study was completed. So. Any thoughts, concerns, questions?
Anything? Any input?
Thank you, Stephanie. You're always so kind, and I know the residents appreciate it, so thank you.
Were you
It's
wanting
opportunity.
input on the resident or non-resident, or were you thinking of bringing that back later?
I think I kind of threw that at you tonight. I don't know if I can get it. I don't know if you feel ready to give me an answer on that. So either way, if you feel strongly one way or another, I'll still take that answer too.
Can you remind me what the difference is?
Right now, so the resident rate is 1,641, and the non-resident rate, the resident rate is 1,175, and the non-resident rate is 1,641.
And it's 3%?
3% increase every July 1. So.
Have we ever bought any plots back?
Oh, yes.
Oh, we have?
Yes. Uh-huh.
Any by me? No.
Do you buy them back at the new rate?
Yes, we buy them back at the going rate, and what I try to do, because we have this resident and non-resident rate thing going on, if the person purchased it at a non-resident rate, and I can identify that, then they will get the non-resident rate today.
Back, yeah.
If they bought them at the resident rate, they'll get them at the resident rate back. So. Any other questions?
I'm just thinking, making 3% on your money, you should buy some plots and sell them.
Yeah, you make 3% plus you have real estate to back it up.
Just come in and see me and I'll get you hooked up.
Okay, let's go ahead and we'll move on to the next item, number 9B, which is the baseball field priority usage. And that is our city administrator, Aaron Wells, and Andy Spencer, city engineer.
And Mayor and Andy, feel free to fill in any gaps I missed on this. So it's a project that we three have been working on. So I'll be brief, prior to 2017, the city had partnered with Lone Peak Youth Baseball for years and years. We'd been a partner with them. And essentially they managed the field scheduling at Mountain Ridge Park. I wrote Mountain Ridge. I meant to write Heritage, thinking about the wrong park in this moment. And in exchange, essentially, they did all the extra maintenance that a baseball field needs, right? Like dragging the field, preparing it for games, that kind of a thing. In exchange for that, they didn't pay any fees, and they ran the scheduling. In 2017, the council asked us to ask staff to create a field usage policy, and so we did that. And so the city took back over the scheduling of all the fields. The policy did allow for a trade for services, like an MOU type of a situation, where if an organization wanted to provide service in lieu of fees, we would accept that as a part of this new policy. At that time, we kind of had a loose memorandum of understanding with Lone Peak Youth Baseball, who did do some service in exchange for fees. So they were not paying fees during that time frame, or they have not been paying fees during that time frame. It's never been very honestly, the MOU has never been signed. It's kind of been more of an informal agreement. That's been something council's asked us to work on and has really asked staff to iron out. And so we've been working on that. And then this last year, a different baseball team in our area, so I should clarify, Lone Peak Youth Baseball, it's like a rec program, so think of it as like just a city recreation program, except it's not housed in a city. It's just a nonprofit league. Highland Hustle is a competition group of teams, so different type of usage, but they approach the city and say, hey, I know that there's other organizations who have an agreement with the city. Could we do something similar, right, where we do some extra service and are allowed to rent the fields for free? And so if you'll move forward for me, Lena. So we didn't really want to pick and choose. We felt like we're in a hard situation, and Lone Peak Youth Baseball was great, Highland Hustle was great, and Highland Hustle has provided some service for us just out of the goodness of their heart this past fall. They helped clean up the heritage fields. So what we asked instead is we asked both of them, okay, give us your proposals. What do you want for field usage, and what are you willing to donate to the city in exchange? And so as we reviewed the proposals, we realized, I think that we can mediate something here. We don't, where both teams are able to get field time that they're requesting. And so we have kind of worked out a verbal agreement where the different teams get different fields depending on the time of year and the use that they need. And again, we'll still cut the grass, we still pay for the water, we still do kind of the basic park maintenance stuff, but they're going to be responsible for trash pickup. They're going to be responsible for dragging the fields, for marking the bases, things like that. And in exchange, so they get priority scheduling, and then they do like a regular mass cleanup twice a year. And in exchange, they don't pay any fees to the city for their field rental. So we do still have some kinks to work out there, but that's kind of the general agreement where we're at with those two organizations.
So, Aaron, how do you monitor the service that they do? I mean, why wouldn't you just charge a fee?
We could, and
to maintain it.
We could, but I will tell you that staff cannot. We don't have the staffing right now, nor would we get enough money from the rental contracts to drag the fields, to mark the bases, to do those things that they expect if they want to show up and play a baseball game. Highland City doesn't have the staff to do that. And so this is their offering of, we'll do this for you in exchange, and we're providing a service. They feel they're providing a service to the community, a recreation opportunity for kids in the area that the city's not providing. So in exchange for that, we'd ask that you not charge us fees, is their request for that. And in exchange for some extra cleanup days where they do some kind of an annual spring cleanup and a fall cleanup type of a thing.
But there's other maintenance besides what you've listed.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, how do we pay for that? That just comes out of the general fund or parks or something?
As it really has been in the past, right? I mean, just the mowing and the, just kind of general grass maintenance that we're doing there would come out of the general fund. So really, it's been rare that these fields have been, we've been charging for these fields because a majority of the use has been Lone Peak Youth Baseball. We only have a handful of others who have rented the fields for a price.
I think in the when they submitted their MOU, your Lone Peak Baseball says they have about 600 youth that participate, about 220 that come from the Highland area. It's mainly Highland, Alpine, and Cedar Hills. And then I believe the Hustle, I think they said that about 80 kids, but about 60 were mainly from the Highland area. Are you thinking right?
A good share of their participants were from Highland as well. It seems 40, 50, somewhere in there. I'm going out of memory, though. So the greater percentage of their players were also from Highland.
And then what they'll need to do each time before the game, they've got to go drag it, the field, and they've got to mark it. And then the service we've talked about is, as the season gets going, we start getting a lot of weeds, in some of the overgrowth, is to try to keep some of that down.
what was the understanding about the dugouts and the fencing? I believe we said they kind of maybe need to help out there, correct?
They'll clean up like the trash and, you know, kind of the results of what happens from their rental, shall we say. And then, you know, as far as the hard infrastructure of the field, that's up to Highland City ultimately. Like we spent about $10,000 upgrading some fencing that had been bent and damaged over the years at Heritage Park this last year. It came from grant money, luckily. But they expressed an interest in partnering with the city for when we do need to do capital improvements, you know, partnering to do a fundraiser, right? Or one instance we're going to ask you about, Lone Peak is requesting to be able to hang up banners along the fences to sell sponsorship space, essentially, to different companies, hang up banners along the fences during the baseball season, and then that revenue could come back towards the field and any capital improvements that need to be made.
And I think the understanding also, there is a snack shack, and during the time when they have it, during the Heritage Park, that's who's responsible for the snack shack, is that correct?
Whoever is renting or whoever is kind of quote unquote, yes, renting the field during that time frame would be able to use that facility.
And the reason is so Lone Peak Baseball plays March through May, and then June it's an all-star team, I believe, that plays. And then Hustle is really a year-round teams, and so you see that's why they're at Mitchell Hollow March through June, but then they're workable to go in from July to October. We brought both groups in together. They were both amenable. That they seemed to be able to work through it. That was, you know, we brought both in, we talked through it. This is what both of them felt that would work, you know, good for both of them together. They would work with each other.
And these are just these two baseball diamonds. That doesn't affect the one at Mountain Ridge Park.
Correct.
For the time being.
That Mountain Ridge is not done at this time. So.
And I would recommend this be a year-to-year contract, right? So if things don't work out one year with either of these groups, then we could not renew the contract. Or frankly, if, you know, we can write the contract in such a way if they're not keeping up with their end of the bargain during this season, we can pull their contract.
Hey, Kim, what do you think?
I mean, I kind of have a little bit more understanding of this since both my kids and my husband coaches for both Lone Peak Baseball and the Hustle teams. So I guess I'm kind of the one who initiated this after seeing how Lone Peak trashed our fields, to be honest. They just haven't maintained them. They refused to sign a MOU to be able to maintain them because they just wanted that reservation without any maintenance with it. And so I just was tired of seeing kids get hurt on the field due to holes in the grass. I mean, the field was in pretty bad condition after they used it.
Is this Heritage?
This is Heritage Park, yeah. I mean, there was a lot of growth, grass growth on the field. The dugouts were in really bad conditions. Nothing had been sprayed. I mean, it was pretty bad. And so I just thought, you know, if they're not willing to do it, then bring in some competition. Because there's lots of teams that are willing to use this field and do a much better job and willing to sign a contract here. I know I've talked to Hustle, and they had an understanding that it was June through October for them, so I think that's something that you need to talk through also. But I think the main thing is holding Lone Peak accountable for the same type of maintenance that Hustle is going to do. If Hustle is going to, you know, spray and do weeds and make sure that the field is dragged and that the dugouts are maintained, Lone Peak has to do the same exact thing. So I just want to see the maintenance agreements on that.
Yeah, I have a couple of comments, questions. So is there any other groups besides these two groups that have requested or will be displaced if we just do these groups? Also, if we do something like this agreement, I would like to be very clear in the contract what's expected of them and be prepared to say, if you don't make good on this contract, you do not use the field. So my concern is they won't make good on the contract, they'll still use the field.
Yeah,
And
especially
so
how we
say,
follow through on things in Highland.
and if they're using the snack shack, it seems to me that the city should get a percentage of the profits that they're making in the snack shack. I mean, it doesn't have to be a lot. It can be 5%, but we're giving it to them for free for a money-making you know, to make money for their teams, which I think is great, and I want to be supportive. But I also think it takes a toll on the facilities. And so part of that revenue needs to come back to the city. And they need to be prepared to put in for some capital projects. Because, you know, my daughter played softball and played competitive softball and went to college on a softball scholarship in New York. And those girls are tough on dugouts. They hang on the fences. Their bags hang on their fences. It's not that they're trying to be malicious. It's just that the game takes a toll on the facilities. And so if these two teams have basically rights to first use of the fields and majority use of the fields, these teams, especially if they're competitive teams, they're charging money, right? We need to make sure that they're not just using the city. And yeah, they need to contribute a little bit more.
Yeah, I agree.
I think that's absolutely an excellent point and something staff wants to do. We've hated that the Lone Peak agreement has been such an informal, nobody's really holding anybody accountable because we really haven't said these are the terms agreement, honestly, for the past 5 years. It just has never really risen to the top of.
Well, we sent them an MOU and then they didn't want to sign it.
Well, and they gave us one that we didn't want to sign, and so it's been back and forth, and honestly, just between staff turnover and priorities, it hasn't been a high priority. So Councilmember Rodell is right. It has been driven to be a high priority basically because Hustle approached us and said, we want the same thing, and we were like, well, why can we not tell them yes? That's not fair. And so this was us trying to make it fair. But I absolutely do want to hold these teams accountable and say, this is what you agreed to, right? We have it now in writing, and if you can't hold up your end of the agreement, then we'll go to elsewhere. Councilmember Peterson, we did advertise that, hey, we're accepting proposals for this on our website. Honestly, we did not do a big push because we have a limited number of fields, and we knew that the more, it would be hard to get many more. We knew that these two teams were interested, right? And we thought that it gave us a good variety because it's one recreation team, or league, I should say, and one competition, right? So you kind of serve both of the sides of the sport by trying to work it out through these two teams. Councilmember Rodella, you're right. I had a typo. It is March through May, and then so Hustle would have it from June through October. And so I just had a typo there.
And I like how you guys did it where, so one team is on Mitchell Hollow when this team is on Heritage, because then can there be like a checklist when end of May comes?
Yeah, absolutely.
Then the city can kind of do a walkthrough with each team and say, okay, this is what this team is giving you, this team right here. Are you okay with this checklist, everything that's been checked off according to the MOU?
And at one point, we were trying to decide, okay, well, maybe you get this field a couple days a week and this field a few days a week. And we decided it would just be cleaner to just separate it and say, this whole month's, right, these whole months it's you and these whole months it's you. So nobody's pointing fingers, right? It's pretty obvious who either kept up the field or did not keep up the field.
And then, Aaron, the agreement with the school district is they use that field at Heritage, right, during this school day. And there's no restriction or agreement there. It's just, they just use it during PE classes.
So the Heritage Field is actually, the field at Mountain Ridge Junior High is actually, it's not, we only own the one field. The other field is the junior high.
The junior high goes and uses Heritage.
Oh, the junior high uses ours.
Yeah.
That's my understanding.
During the
just
school
during
year.
the school day. So it wouldn't affect those who are practicing after school.
No, it just affects the way the field is.
That's a good point that we need to.
Because there has been damage and trash left over from the junior high.
Yeah, that we need to realize, we're not going to hold either team accountable for that. I mean, it'll be hard to check that, right, and distinguish who is who, other than, they can take a before picture, I guess, when they show up to the field type of a thing.
Clarify this just real quick. The Heritage Baseball Diamond is a city-owned property, correct?
Heritage one, but the one that's kitty corner to it is owned by the school district, and any entity has to work with them to rent it.
Okay, but they use ours as well. Well, so why don't they pay for using ours?
Yeah.
that's historical knowledge. I think it would probably just was a agreement. I don't know.
I'll have to look back, because I called them when Kim and I were out there one day. I called the school district to ask them. I'll have to dig up my notes.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'd like to know that
Yeah.
because
So they need to
they've got
pay 'em.
more money than we do.
Yeah.
Especially when they're damaging it, leaving trash.
Yeah, especially if they're trashing it.
And clothes
I will
there.
say the junior high is very good to work with us on fleeing and not charge us for the use of their facility during fleeing. So maybe that's, or we can
What
say
they're
that's the
thinking.
partnership,
Yep.
but they don't charge us for the use of their facility during fleeing.
One thing I wanted to add as well, in comment to Councilmember Peterson's comments, both teams offered that whatever they made off the snack shack and any sponsorship and whatever would all come back to the city in terms of, okay, we made this much and we can put this much into the capital improvements at the park. So neither one were trying to necessarily make money off those activities as much as generate revenues that could go into the park again.
Okay.
I like it. Will the Hustle team, if they're on Mitchell Hollow, will they also be helping Chad to maintain that?
Yeah, so I think, so we'll work out something there, but yes, whatever field that either Lone Peak or Hustle or Chad is on, we expect them to do kind of that extra maintenance. Chad gets priority on Mitchell Hollow because of all of the capital improvements he put in, was that 2 years ago now?
Yeah.
There, and so kind of that's the order of priority that we're looking at. And there are a couple other teams who have tried to rent that we're gonna have to work through some scheduling stuff with, but we feel like we can do it, so.
So if they're, so will they get like a certain amount of time for each, or how does that work? Like if Hustle, if you say it's, I guess, June through October, is that like, of Heritage Park, is that like 9 hours a week, or?
Yeah, so they're gonna give us, I think it was 2 or 3 days a week, a couple hours type of a thing.
Is that the same for Lone Peak as well then?
Yes, so each team will provide, or each entity will provide us their schedule. So they're not going to completely block it out, especially on weekends for Lone Peak. They mostly play during the weekdays. So there'll still be some opportunities for other activities.
That was one of the questions I had, is if we were okay that allow them to have some Saturday league games. So as a council, one thing we gotta be careful with, we traditionally have a lot of family reunions at our different parks. Some assume that if they rent, they're at Heritage, they rent the pavilion, some have come to the assumption that when they rent that, they also get the baseball diamond. I've rented there, I never would have thought the baseball diamond came with it, but some families, they thought, and so if they're doing a big family reunion, they're thinking the baseball diamond's there. It appears the council in the past had not allowed any Saturday play because of reunions during the summer. The questions come up is, can they do tournaments during the summer on, if it would even be 2 weekends during, to be able to do that out of the month, and what's the council feel on that? That was one of the requests that also came up.
Well, look at Mitchell Hollow, you have a pavilion a lot closer to that baseball park, and you rent the pavilion for family reunions, and you can rent the baseball for something different. They're not tied to each other, which
Yeah, I wouldn't
would
tie
never
them
think
together.
that the baseball would be tied to the pavilion at all.
Okay, that was just a question that came up. The council in the past has not allowed Saturday reservations of the fields. That was the question. Are you okay to allow the Lone Peak or Hustle to now start saying you can do tournament games on a Saturday on these fields?
Yeah, I'm fine with that. I mean, Lone Peak does baseball games all day long on those fields, and it's fun, and it's a great thing for the neighborhood. And if we can get more games going, especially putting Mountain Ridge Park in, baseball park, I think it's great for Highland. Yeah.
Okay, I agree with Kim.
Okay, got two. Any other input from the other three?
I agree with Kim too.
Okay, I just want to, okay.
I just want to make sure, I guess, if the maintenance is going to be the same, I think the hours need to be the same also. And if there's going to be more hours and days for one league, then there has to be more maintenance. I don't know.
And that's an interesting equation because Lone Peak is requesting basically every weekday night during their season. I don't know what they're requesting necessarily for June, because June is just practice for their all-star team. So I suspect it's less. I don't think we really talked about their schedule in June, but during March, April, and May, they're requesting 4:30 to 8 every evening or something of that nature. But that's only for the 2 months, where Hustle is requesting 9 hours a week, but that's for basically March to October. So the equivalent hours may work out, we never did add that up, but that's what's being requested out of both leagues.
Well, and the reason why it works, both Hustle and Lone Peak were really workable, and I believe the reason why Hustle became so workable is they could not put one of the Highland fields as their home field. They had to go put a field in Riverton, my understanding was.
Yeah.
And so because of that, they're really only practicing now versus doing games. And that's what they kept saying, hey, we really are looking for a place to practice. Our games are going to need to be at our home field. I guess it's in Riverton or something?
Yeah, so there's a league called Wasatch League that requires you to put a home field. What is your home field in order to be able to accept it into that league? So there are actually quite a few baseball leagues around this area that have to go to Riverton as their home field and use Riverton, travel all the way to Riverton because they can't get a field closer to them.
But that's what was worked out. I mean, that's what they submitted for this year, and they seem to be okay moving forward this year that way.
I didn't think about that.
Okay.
Okay.
And I have one more slide, but I think we covered everything. Will you advance for me, just to make sure? Okay, so it sounds like council's amenable to this. We're gonna kind of monitor tournaments. I think our thought is, if they wanna start them, let's look at 2 a month and see how that goes, type of a thing. But as far as the sponsorship banners, I think that goes along with snack bar, right? Like a percentage comes back to the city. So we'll write that into the contracts and work on getting those executed.
Thank you very much for your work on this.
I appreciate it. Is that then, because we have all these sign rules in Highland, right? So if we allow sponsorship baseball signs, do we have to allow other signs?
Not a question we thought about.
We restrict all signs on city property to those that are approved by the city, so.
So we count these
They're
as
okay.
approved.
Okay.
Okay,
I
sounds
like it.
good.
Thank you, Rob.
Okay.
No.
Moving on to some other items, and it's up to the council. Today's league, Utah League of Cities meeting was a very active meeting. They call that we're heading into the crazy time of the legislators because we're now within 2 weeks of kind of finalizing. If it's okay, we thought we'd give some highlights. I think myself, Kim, Aaron chimed in. Did anyone else have opportunity to chime in today? So just a couple of the bills, and Kim and Aaron chime in. One of the bills that we need to be aware of that was a concern was SB 174. That was where they talked about moving the road width down to 25 feet. It passed the House of Representatives with it being 32 feet and has now moved to the Senate. Actually, I think they've also voted on it, so I think it's passed all the way. Has that one passed all the way through? No, that's SB 174. It's still at the Senate. There is an action item on SB 174 that the league has put out as of this evening. It says, if your representative serves on the committee, please urge them to vote against SB 173. I've looked, I do not believe any of our representatives there. It says HB 173 directs the courts toward both attorney's fees and expert witness fees to private parties that prevail against the government entity. Even if parties don't prevail, the possibility of collecting attorney fees and witness fees invites unnecessary litigation against the government entity. ULTC opposes this legislation because it creates a potentially unnecessary and baseless litigation and more expenses for the local government, which are unable to pass on to the taxpayer. So they are asking for them to remove that out of the HB 173. Just if that was anything else on the HB 173, this is the land use bill that is going forth. They've already changed their road situation. Anyone else aware of HB 174? We need to have a discussion, or 173? Anything else there? Yes?
Yeah.
It was. Did it pass? Okay, so it's been held in committee. That's maybe why they're asking for action, because it's being held. Okay, there's a new one that just hit. It is the homeless one. It's 49. Is that HB 49?
499.
499. I'm sorry, I've got it pulled up right here. HB 499. This is the modification of the formula used by the Office of the Homeless Services to disperse funds from the homeless shelters city's mitigation restricted account to municipalities to mitigate the impact on homeless shelters. I will tell you that I have a special meeting with MAG in the morning, Mountain Land Association of Governments. They're very concerned. In Utah County, it appears that they use United Way to help with the homeless shelters. That's kind of, this bill would say that they cannot use that. It has to be a government entity. They also are looking for that if they have all the homeless shelters filled in Salt Lake, they want to be able to have a homeless shelter down in Utah County. So this bill also designates some of that. It also prohibits, it provides the state tax commission to subtract a certain amount from the local government's annual local contribution. I believe right now we're paying, all I know, it changes it quite a bit, because we now are going to go like to 2.25, and I think we're.
And it goes, I think, from somewhere around 1% to 2.55.
Yeah, so it will affect our budgets, and it's to be based on the count of the availability of the homeless shelters beds. And
What does that mean? 1% of our total budget we have to pay for homeless shelters?
Of our sales tax.
So whatever we get sales tax-wise, we have to give 1%. Now it's going to go up to 2.25 to go to the homeless. The other thing, they are looking for an area that the state can have permanent homeless housing to help move homeless into, to help them start to transition into communities, kind of try to help them a little bit more versus temporary housing. And they were stated they're looking for state ground, that maybe we'd have some, services by that. So we'll have to just kind of watch what is going on there. There is a lot about the county overflow. It describes the memberships of the county overflow task force. It talks about it modifies the process requirements of the county overflow plan. It also talks about they can't, now maybe you know about this, Chief, they can't camp, a homeless cannot camp out or something like that. You can't go, I guess it's cold outside, you can't go take down their camp, but you can't allow camps or something like that. It was just.
I'm not
It's
sure.
basically, yeah, you're right, Mayor, just when it reaches, the code blue, when it's too cold, you can't
kick them out.
You can't remove an encampment because they're huddled down, right, trying to survive the cold at that point.
So they could camp in the parks or in the tunnels along the Murdoch Canal?
If it's cold outside at a certain temperature, at that time, you cannot remove them. That's in this, that is why I think a lot of them now are watching this HB 499. Anything else on that one? Okay, we will now, there was, and I can't remember the bill, there was one about referendums that was going about that if the council voted, 2/3 of the council supported the referendum, or did a land use, and it was passed by 2/3 of the council, that it could not be referred. There was a lot of legalities that came up about that. There was a lot of emotions about constitutionalism of that. So that will be, do you know what bill number that was?
I'll look it up. I know I have it in my notes.
I don't have my notes in the office.
All right, SB 199. The league split, I think they'll end up staying neutral on it. Some cities support it, some do not. And they're kind of strong on both sides.
There were strong opinions on both sides. This allows referral of a referendum to voters for a land use law that passed by 2/3 vote of the local legislative body. And there was some that questioned the constitutionality of not having the vote. They were worried about this. This is moving in, and it was a heated discussion about how to support this or oppose it. I'm sure Rob, he's over there smiling because he knows this deals with the. You want to chime in on that one, Rob, at all?
So when does the legislature end? When is this torture over?
It's
March 3rd.
First or second?
Next Friday.
It's 11 days.
So we only have
This is your last
10
council update on it.
No, we'll have that's true. Okay, gravel pits, SB 75. Okay, on SB 75, it passed. What that does is it allocates that if you have a gravel pit in your city, that all the sales tax will go to the entity that weighs it. So if it's weighed in Highland, the sales tax, the point of sale is Highland. Now, what I didn't understand on this one, Aaron and Kim, what's the 50-50 portion? This is where they get really concerned, is going, because it's changing the portion, how it gets.
It's that 50/50 sales tax distribution that we have. So it changes the whole 50/50. It shrinks up whole sales tax for all local governments. But for us, it benefits us. There's about 50 cities where it actually benefits them to have sand and gravel pits. So ULCT is going to come out with a kind of a draft spreadsheet of how it's going to, what are the expenditures, how is it going to affect cities?
So
Negatively, there'll be a lot more, but Highland, it affects and it benefits us, but at the same time, it sets a kind of a slippery slope precedent of dipping into that 50/50 sales tax distribution.
Which the league says there was an agreement that was signed legally about the 50/50, and so now they're going in and do that. This was a heated debate on that it has passed all the way through the representatives and the Senate, so it's all the way, it's now a bill. They're now talking about encouraging the governor to veto and using the league's power to go in and veto this bill. That was the question. Do they support vetoing the bill, going to the governor and trying to have him veto the bill?
So they'll be asking cities
So
to
it
sign that.
actually, as it is, it wouldn't benefit Highland very long because our gravel pit's almost, unless we abandon Viewpoint and they dig it out. Aren't you on a big gravel pit? You're kidding for that.
Okay, that is on the gravel pit. The next one I was following, which I thought was interesting, was HB 173, and this one requires a court award reasonable attorney fees to a private party who prevails in a certain civic action adverse to the government entity. What they're saying is if they sue the government entity, they now can come seek their legal fees. So Rob, has that not been the case? If they've sued a government entity, they can't get legal fees?
There's very limited cases. Basically, there's a couple federal statutes where you can get attorney's fees, and then for most state statutes, there's a few limited exceptions where you're allowed to get attorney fees for suing the government. But by and large, you can't, and that includes a lot of takings, contract disputes, torts, and things. So if someone slips and falls on a city sidewalk that's poorly maintained, they can sue the city for damage, but they can't recover their attorney fees. And it feels like every year there is a bill that is proposed regarding attorney fees against government entities, and it so far has been shot down year after year, but it's one that has come up again.
So it's up again. It does not have, it does have both the Senate and House representative that's sponsoring it. So it has been held, it was heard today, and it's been held, but this is the stuff in the next 2 weeks. It also just starts maneuvering, and they warned us, is in the morning, you can be talking about this as being a big issue.
It's actually just in the next week.
Yeah, and then then also it changes by the afternoon, or in the morning it was an issue, and by afternoon it's now become heated. Like this kind of raised up on this HB 173, I think today. That sounds like that's something that's kind of changed that wasn't in that bill. So I'm just going, okay, what other bills that we have not discussed that we need to note?
SB 166.
Which is?
Micro schools.
Oh, you want to go into that one? You probably have a better understanding of that one.
No, I don't really want to.
But so they did change a few things with that.
They changed a few things.
So you have to go with the zoning ordinance there, but it still allows schools up to 16 kids.
Yeah. But they came back to the fire department. So what they're trying to counter with is they're worried it's going to pass. So they've went to the fire, and they're going to limit the number of kids in the schools based on square feet. And you can see these bills are kind of fighting. You have someone trying to say, hey, if you pass this, we need to have this down in place for the fire.
That one died, though.
Is that one died?
That one did die this morning. It could be revived, but right now it did die
Will you follow on that one?
this
But
morning.
we didn't, is there a, I'm just thinking about the one that we talked about with in-home preschools.
This is home-based education.
Right, but because for in-home preschools, we didn't have a limit, right?
We did not.
No, we don't have a limit. Theoretically, there's still a maximum occupancy under fire code for every structure, but I mean, I doubt they'll hit it, and we may never know if they do or not.
And for a micro school, you don't have to have a business license though, right?
They're trying to amend it so that you do. So essentially that local ordinances still apply as far as business licensing and that kind of regulation.
Okay.
166. What's this showing?
But then they're trying to revive it with an
Okay.
amendment.
Anyway, we need to be following some of the school
Yeah,
stuff,
it says
because,
paused right there. They paused it on the Senate floor amendment.
okay. Paused, or where are you
Oh,
seeing
does it
paused?
say passed?
It says passed.
No, it died. And then they're gonna try to do an amendment and bring it back.
Bring it back. Anything else?
There's an HB 301, which reduces the amount we're going to get for our gas tax. In the short term, it kind of lengthens it out essentially, because there was a new gas tax formula put in place 4 years ago or so, I want to say, and so it'll shorten in the short term, but lengthen it over a longer period of time. So the league is supportive of that, but you will see an impact to that with this upcoming budget. I just found this out this evening, Chief William let me know, there's a public safety retirement bill he and I have been arm wrestling over, that has died for this year, and the sponsor is going to work on a larger bill thinking about all Tier 2 employees, not just public safety, over the next year. So we'll see if that comes back next season.
There have been presented 608 bills. They said over 500 is very unusual, so
They're busy.
they are busy, and everyone's trying to track the second a new bill comes out, read it, understand it, that's what I'm saying, and we still have 11 days, and this is where some of them, they've been saving
Really
us,
get
they
pushed
bring it
through,
in.
yeah.
Okay,
Okay.
anything else?
Can I just bring up a couple things real quick, because I know we want to be gone by 10. So we had a foundation meeting, Highland Foundation, on Thursday. We kicked around some ideas for kind of fundraising and different things. One, and maybe Aaron kind of hinted at this, but Wes Warren was there, and we were talking about naming rights for the whole park. Has that already been addressed? So we were kind of wondering if it made sense maybe to pick a handful of people that have been very successful and approach them and say, would you like to name the park for $1 million or something? So it's just a fundraising idea. The other thing is, and we can talk about that more, the other thing is we talked about, and I think this would be kind of a fun thing if anybody's interested. At first we talked about this as being a fundraising thing, but I think it could be a fun annual event. It could also be kind of an information. But we were talking about kind of resurrecting the idea of having a Highland Gala, a community kind of spirit building thing. Actually, the foundation has checked with Alpine Country Club. They would be willing to let us use the facility for free if they catered it. And catering would be $25 to $45, depending on what you want to do, whether it's buffet or individual. But we were kind of thinking it'd be fun to send out some invitations. We could change who we invite every year and invite people. And we could have a presentation about, hey, this is our new park. This is how you can donate if you want to. We could just have a display. But it'd be fun to have a good speaker. And I'm not sure, maybe we could attract the lieutenant governor or the governor or somebody and kind of talk about the state of the state. Or we could get some sort of popular speaker to come in. I don't know, just what you think. But we thought it'd be fun to do an annual gala and kind of for community spirit and that. So I thought maybe just kind of think about it. Because actually charging a lot for people to come may or may not be a successful fundraiser, although there's some cities that do that. But, even if you broke even and then had the opportunity, I don't know.
I think those are good conversations to have.
Yeah.
I love it.
A question for the naming of the park. Maybe we have just a minute if it's okay. So let's give a big picture of some naming. So we've stated that for $1 million, they can name the Mountain Ridge Park. I'm going to put it Mountain Ridge Park, if it's 17 acres, if someone went and bought that park, probably a minimum of $400,000 an acre. We're giving that $6.8 million of ground value. We're now putting $9 million in as a park value. I'm just saying, as an economic standpoint, you're going, for $1 million, you get to have your name on a really nice product. So the question is, if someone like Adobe came, are we okay with a corporate donor and calling it the Adobe Park? Or do we feel like our residents could say, hold it, you sold us out for, because this would be probably, and we could limit it on the naming rights, because right now in your agreements that you've done with Paul and Rachel Adams, as long as that park is, the playground standing is what it is. Once that playground is removed, it is too old, then that naming right goes away.
So I guess the question is if someone's willing to give us $1 million, do we care what they name it?
Okay, so now, what about if you have a resident that's lived here a year, and now they want to call it, the XYZ Park after their name? It's traditionally, you have a park named after long-term residents or someone that had owned that property that did some type of donation to the property. If the council's okay, I would say if the council's okay with $1 million donation for that naming, I'm just trying to say, it's a pretty good asset, and do I think you might be able to get someone that's willing to give $1 million because they want their name on something? And I'm not, and they might want it on one of their kids' name, or a family member that they dearly loved, or someone that was a veteran. You could get some naming rights. They really haven't been long-term here in Highland. I mean, if you had the Thompsons or the Whites, or the Adamsons, or the Days, or the Buellers, we'd all understand that. Those are names long-term, but you might have someone that comes in that is, Zango or something like that tries to grab it. I don't know,
I'm okay with it. I feel like if someone's been here a year, they're every much a resident Highland as somebody that's been here 20. And I know the tradition isn't there, but if they're willing to put that much
money
into a park, I would say they're putting some investment into Highland.
And especially because we would still approve whatever kind of signage or whatever. It's not like we would have a neon.
Because full transparency, Paul asked about the naming of the park, and he says, for $500,000, we kind of set that price at $1 million, and I told him that. And then he says, well, for $500,000, that wouldn't be the name of the park. And so that was just kind of just some input.
Right.
Mr. Mayor, or Scott, rather, have you looked into what the norm is for naming rights? Like, for example, the Bees Park is Smith's Field. Is there a formula that they have for naming rights?
I don't know that.
Yeah, but that's different because those are marketing. I mean, that name.
Well, Adobe Park could be marketing.
Yeah, I'm just saying, but it's common. I mean, it would only be good for here in Highland, so that would be a marketing of Highland.
Sure, I'm sure there's some sort of formula, because I know one of my neighbors worked in sports marketing. Maybe we could reach out to him and ask him how they would approach it.
I think that'd be great if you do.
Yeah, I'll reach out to him. So.
We could call it.
That's right. That's low. Okay. Anything else?
Okay, that's it. It's 10 o'clock.
Okay, it's actually 10:02. Is there any other things that need to come before the council before I have a motion? Okay.
I move that we leave.
Mean we adjourn?
Yes.
Second.
Motion by Scott, second. All in favor? Aye. We are done. Who won the bet? Who won the bet? They bet every council meeting. Hey, thank you for coming.